The Town of Los Gatos Planning Commission meeting of Wednesday, June 12th, 2019 is now called to order. Please take a moment to silence your devices. Ms. Arnowitz, would you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Badami?
Here.
Commissioner Birch?
Here.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Here.
And then Chair Hudas.
Here.
And so we have, for the record, absent this evening, Commissioner Tavana and Commissioner Janoff, and Vice Chair Hansen, we expect to be late.
Okay, great, thank you. I would ask that everyone please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As the Planning Commission conducts this meeting this evening on behalf of the Town Council and residents of Los Gatos, we encourage active participation, and we're delighted to see as many people turn out for this meeting. It's essential for democracy and critical to the work of the Planning Commission. The participation tonight can occur through written comments about agenda items submitted to the staff prior to a meeting, which are very helpful. And during our meeting, there are two opportunities for members of the public to participate. During the verbal communications period, an individual may speak on a topic that is not on the agenda. And during the hearing on a specific item, any member of the public may speak about that item that is, of course, on the agenda. If you wish to address the commission tonight during verbal communication period or during consideration of an item, please complete a speaker card. There are some on the back of the chairs, and turn them in to a staff member, and please print your name clearly, as I will have to interpret them. When you speak, I ask that you come up to the podium and adjust the microphone so that you are speaking directly into it. Please state your name and address for the record. In fairness to all who want to speak at this meeting, it's requested that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. So the verbal communications period is at this time, so members of the public are invited to address the commission on any item that is not on the agenda tonight. I don't have any cards signifying that. Does anyone wish to speak about something that's not on our agenda tonight? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to the consent calendar. And we have one consent item to be acted upon in a single motion. And before we act on that item, any member of the public or commission may request that the item be pulled from the consent agenda. At the chair's discretion, items removed may be considered either before or after the public hearings. So I will actually pull the one item which we have, which is approval of the minutes May 22nd, 2019, to make a minor amendment to it. In the consideration of the fence ordinance during the commission discussion, there was a motion attempted. Actually, I made the motion, and it failed for lack of a second. And that was a motion to deny or to not approve or not recommend the actions to the council. So with that amendment, do we have a motion on the consent calendar? Commissioner Badami.
I move to approve the consent item, which is the approval of the minutes for May 22nd, 2019, with the amendment as mentioned by Chair Hudas, with the motion that was made by him for a complete record.
Thank you. We have a second. Commissioner O'Donnell? Okay, seconded. I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye. Okay, passes 4-0 with several absences, and I'm sure you'll account for that the correct way. Okay, so now we get to the new public hearings, and the first item is item 2 on our agenda, which is 16212 Los Gatos Boulevard, Plan Development Application PD 17002 and negative declaration ND 19002, requesting approval of a plan development to rezone two properties, Zone CH to CHPD, to allow for construction of a new commercial building, APN 523-06010 and 523-06011. Property owner applicant, 16212 Los Gatos Boulevard, LLC, and the project planner is Ryan Safdie. May I have a show of hands from commissioners who visited the property under consideration? Are there any disclosures? Okay. Mr. Safdie, I understand you'll be giving the staff report this evening.
Good evening, Commissioners. Before you tonight is a proposal for a plan development application to rezone the subject property from highway commercial to highway commercial with the plan development overlay. And this is to allow construction of a new commercial building with reduced front yard setbacks to provide right-of-way improvements in compliance with the Safe Routes to School program. The applicant originally submitted in 2011, and the project has an extensive background, which is summarized in the staff report. The subject site is a corner lot fronting on both Los Gatos Boulevard and Shannon Road, and contains an existing commercial building occupied by Artisan Wine Depot, which is proposed to remain. The PD application would provide specific guidance for the future commercial development, and an Arc and Site application would be required to implement the proposed project. The current proposal is for a two-story commercial building with retail space on the first floor and office space on the second floor. A negative declaration was prepared for the project. The proposed PD application is consistent with the mixed-use commercial general plan designation, Los Gatos Boulevard plan, commercial design guidelines, and underlining commercial or highway commercial zoning district, minus the front setback and landscaping requirement of 15 feet on Los Gatos Boulevard. And staff recommends that the Planning Commission forward a recommendation of approval to the Town Council. This concludes staff's presentation, and we are happy to answer any questions.
Very good. Thank you. Are there questions? Yes.
As it is currently written with it being partially office, are there any limitations to the use of that, such as, is there anything limiting medical offices or anything of the sort on this project?
That can be added as a performance standard, that medical office is prohibited, given that that's a different parking and traffic ratio.
Other questions? I had a couple of questions. I have actually many questions about traffic, but I'm going to hold those until after the public hearing. But I had a couple about the process. So I understand that the review of the PD is an opportunity for the Planning Commission to review the architectural compatibility, style, and details. Is that correct? Is it the purview of the Planning Commission to review the architecture at this point?
Yeah, the Planning Commission can provide input on the performance standards, and that can include guidance for the architecture.
So there will be an architecture and site application later, but that will not come to the Planning Commission. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. If I may, I had another question about the setbacks. I think there were some questions. What is the allowable setback there? Is it 25 feet or is it 15 feet? And maybe you need to explain a little more than just that.
So it is a 15-foot setback requirement along Los Gatos Boulevard. There was an error or discrepancy in the staff report, so that latest desk item should have addressed that.
Okay, so it seemed like that attracted quite a bit of public comment, but just to be clear, the required setback is 15 feet, it's not 25 feet.
That's correct.
Okay. And what is the proposed setback?
5 feet.
5 feet. So there's a 10-foot variance then, is that correct?
It's not a variance, but it would be an allowance for
Okay.
the 10-foot exception, basically.
Exception, I'm sorry. Okay. Other questions? Okay, so we'll now open the public portion of the public hearing and give the applicant an opportunity to address the commission for up to 10 minutes, and that includes the applicant's team. So I have Kevin Ibrahimi. I don't know if there are others that have submitted cards as part of the applicant's team. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. Right. Well, sometimes there's not a number. So, to be clear, we're on item 2, which is 16212 Los Gatos Boulevard, and do I have a card from the applicant?
No.
Oh, you can submit one later, if you just please state your name and address for the record.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Eugene Sakai, Studio S Squared Architecture. We're at 1000 South Winchester Boulevard in San Jose. Do you mind if I just test out the technology here real quick? Okay. All right. We're all good. So just for the record, I'd like to note that I handed Ms. Zarnowitz 11 copies of 10 letters of support that we received, or that staff received, as a desk item for the chair. So good evening, Planning Commissioners. On behalf of my client, Scott Plouts of STEM Development, I'd like to thank you in advance for taking the time to review and hear our application for 16212 Los Gatos Boulevard. Projects in beautiful areas like Los Gatos invariably take a very long time to work their way through the entitlement process, and our project is certainly no exception to that. Experienced developers and architects are aware of this, and we accept it as part of the process of crafting a thoughtful project that is one that works from all sides, both public and private. Our team has been working on this project since 2013, and during that time, the proposal has taken on many different forms. I'd like to take a few minutes to show you some of what has been explored during that time and how our project has improved through the community feedback process. From 2013 to 2016, we worked on a variety of housing-only proposals of various density. Though we felt as if our residential project fit well into its context, ultimately the community and the town council did not agree. And at a town council meeting in March 2016, advised us to explore a purely commercial option that was conforming with all aspects of the town zoning ordinance. This was actually the final design that we presented to town council back in 2016. Based on that recommendation, we regrouped and began to consider a fully commercial project and presented a few different conforming alternatives at a well-attended community meeting at Town Hall hosted by Planning on July 2016. Among these options were a fully underground parking garage with additional surface parking and a 2-story retail and office building of 31,500 square feet, a mixed-use project proposing 7 one-bedroom apartments, they're on the right, above 8,600 square feet of retail, and an all-new retail building of approximately 11,000 square feet. And finally, a retail proposal that preserved and renovated the existing 1-story dealership building while adding a retail building at the corner with a partial second-floor setback to reduce the scale of the building as seen from the boulevard. That concept proposal was then developed further and formally submitted for review to the town in February 2017, largely as depicted in these few slides here. During the town's initial review, staff advised us that the recently adopted Safe Routes to School program would impact our application. Here to talk about our team's response to that requirement is Scott Shork of BKF Engineers.
Scott Shork, BKF Engineers. The Safe Routes to School program was implemented in midstream of the development, and what it requires us to do is actually narrow Los Gatos Boulevard by a lane. And the green markings is the new bike lane. The Pork Chop Island at the intersection of Shannon in Los Gatos, which is pretty unusual situation where it has a sign that says no right turn on red, but that typically people, that's not normal. So non-residents, there's probably a percentage of people that blow through there. So this is very safe for the kids going to school, and it moves the crosswalk up to Roberts, which makes it more efficient intersection, and that'll probably be addressed later. Today, just for purposes of clarity, I went out and made these measurements, and the new project is proposed to be just under 25 feet setback from the face of the building to face of curb. And then you see the Yoga Source is around 27 and a half. The Robson Homes are 26 and a half. Compass is set back a little bit further. And these are all two-story buildings. And then Edward Jones is 25. I just went back out there. It's really 23 to 25, so it's about an average of 24-ish. And then there's a resident that Magnus and Loop that's also 2 stories, 18 and a half. And then the Taco Bell is the only 1 story at 24 and a half. The other thing that's critical to point out is the second floor of this proposed building is set back an additional 11 feet, so it's closer to, I think, about 36 feet, of which these 2 stories are not set back additional. So it's the point being that we're pretty consistent with the neighborhood.
So we have a little graphic here to kind of illustrate how that 24-foot 8 and change is sort of divided here. On the far left, we have the bike lane shown in the green strip. And then from face of curb, working our way to the right, a 4'6" planter strip, a 10-foot sidewalk, and then about another 10 feet plus to the building. So that's just kind of an idea of what that will look like. So in working with town planning staff on the initial application and the town's consulting architect, we've made a number of revisions to the building, which we feel have improved the design and made it more compatible with the look and feel of Los Gatos. A little hard to see on these images, but among these include reducing the mass of the second floor at the corner as to provide a reduced scale at the intersection and better views of the mountains. On the parking lot side, we broke up the roof lines to architecturally express the stair tower between the 2 floors. We also refined the second floor roof massing. Another slide of that. Another suggestion that we implemented was to simplify the roof lines along the boulevard. Namely, we removed a gable form to basically create a continuous eave line. And this last slide, most significantly, I think, shows that we've chosen to break up the glass that we initially proposed at the corner by adding a stone portal feature. We feel that this adds a nice focal point for the intersection, further enhances the pedestrian scale and pedestrian-oriented nature of the whole intersection improvements that Scott Short just talked about. Here's a couple of photo sims that we put together from a distance showing how the building will sit sort of relative to its surroundings and relative to the views of the ridgeline beyond. And this is a view that we put together of the existing condition on top, showing only the dealership building and then our building overlaid on that same perspective. And just another image of a similar vantage point. In conclusion, our project proposes a fairly modestly sized development on what is currently an extremely underutilized site. The existing dealership building, as mentioned in the staff report, is only 2,300 square feet and change on a nearly 1 acre lot on a heavily trafficked site. I'd like to emphasize that our project intentionally does not max out the development potential of the site. Under the height limit and setbacks and coverage ratios, we could have proposed a 3-floor building of nearly 60,000 square feet that would have required 2 levels of underground parking, but would still have been compliant with current zoning, at least numerically. Based on feedback from both the council, community, and staff, we've obviously opted not to pursue such a large project. I think also I wanted to reemphasize what Scott Shork was touching on earlier, in that our project also offers a very large community benefit, in that we will be one of the first projects to build out a significant portion of the adopted Safe Routes to School program at our own expense. It should be noted that this program was adopted into law in 2016, which was 3 years after our initial development application had been filed. Finally, in the last few seconds, I know there's been a lot of concern about the installed story poles and how close they sit to the existing sidewalk. Just to further touch on what was discussed earlier by our civil engineer, the face of curb now is not the future face of curb. That future face of curb is actually 10 feet further into Los Gatos Boulevard. And our intent with the building design is to match the setback that otherwise would have been required by ordinance had the face of curb not changed. And as we pointed out, that is consistent with face of curb setbacks from other nearby properties, two-story buildings at that. That's all I have for now, and again, we're here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions? Yes, Commissioner Badami.
So thank you for reaching out to the community, to the CDAC, to the council, and coming before the Planning Commission back in 2016 and listening to input. But you received quite a bit of significant input, and you may hear it tonight from speakers about the blocking of the mountain views, which is important. What did you do to address that, other than just taking out a small portion of a mass at the corner on the second floor?
I think we did a number of gestures. You know, the allowable height limit at this parcel is 35 feet. We're more than 5 feet below that. There's really no limit as to how big the second floor could have been relative to the first floor, but we chose to make it a significantly smaller footprint and step it back nearly 12 feet from the street frontages. I think as you're walking along the boulevard or even driving along, you know, you really won't perceive that second floor because of that setback. You know, and like I said, I think, you know, we didn't go quite nearly as big as we could have with the project overall.
Okay. If it would be okay with staff, if we could put something on the projector, and that would be Exhibit 12B, page A0.6. And that would be the views with the proposed building with the hillside views.
Sorry, what's the call out on that document again, Commissioner
It's
Badami?
Exhibit 12B, page A0.6,
Thank you.
and it's titled Hillside Views. I didn't know it was going to be that difficult. I would have waited. I think it's the first time I've asked to put something up on the projector. The last, yeah.
Never do that again.
You know, if it's too difficult, I can just ask the applicant directly, because I'm sure he's aware of the page.
Yeah, we drew that.
I'm just looking at this picture, and I'm trying to reconcile how that second story does not significantly block the view of the mountains. If you could just comment on that. And I'm
Sure.
looking at the upper right picture, and it's the view from Los Gatos Boulevard.
Right.
And it looks like the vantage point from where that photo was taken is at an extreme angle and taken from the sidewalk.
Sure. Just disregard the.
Yeah, let's put it to rest. If we
Well,
can-
you know, our firm does a fair amount of work in Los Gatos. We do projects up in the Hillside zoning district as well. You know, in certain cases there are codified percentages of views that can't be blocked, or portions of an elevation of a house that have to be obstructed by tree screening from vantage points on the valley floor. Those are hard and fast numbers, you know, that trigger certain additional requirements or even prevent you from doing projects of a certain scope or mass or whatever. You know, as I mentioned, we worked very closely with town staff and the town's consulting architect on a project that sort of met all the different parameters of a good retail project, among which is addressing kind of a more pedestrian-friendly environment by bringing the building closer to the street. In working with the consulting architect, his only recommendation to improve the project from the standpoint of hillside view protection was the change that I mentioned in notching back that second floor, which we gladly did. Upon doing that, essentially he signed off on that particular aspect of this design and ultimately gave planning staff the ability to recommend your approval of the project as well. I don't, you know, I'm not as expert as you folks on the commission, nor staff, nor the consulting architect on what makes a good project in Los Gatos. I think that's partly why an approval process takes years, because it's part of that sort of discovery of finding out what is uniquely right for this site. And all I can say is we worked with the appropriate people and got their recommendation of approval.
Okay, I appreciate your answer. I'm just looking at the town architect's report, and he did say to eliminate the second floor development at the corner.
Yeah.
And I've got a picture that looks differently from what you did, but you answered my question.
He
so
gave
thank-
us two options, actually. We followed one of them to the letter, and so that was our response.
Thank you.
Yes. Anybody else? Okay. I had a couple questions, if I may. I had the same reaction about the corner treatment. It seems to me that further views are not being revealed by making a notch into the building, because you still have the same elevation, whether you curve or angle at that corner or whether you notch in. Is that correct?
If I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying reducing the floor area there had no net impact on the benefit to the hillside view?
Because of the angle that is taken toward the hillside, that follows along roughly the angle of that front. By turning that angle into a 90-degree notch, you don't reveal more views of the hillside. Is that correct?
I can't speak for why the town architect recommended what he did, but all I can say is that we followed his recommendation to the letter, and that satisfied him with regard to this one issue.
Okay. I had another question, if I may. If the project were compliant with the town's setback requirements, what would it look like? Did you attempt to design to the town's setback requirements.
15-foot setback from property line?
I believe that's what staff
Sure.
stated, so.
Yeah, we actually have a full-blown application that did not make its way up to this level that we submitted. It was actually the initial submittal that I showed you kind of about halfway through my presentation. That was our attempt to submit a fully code-compliant, setback-compliant project prior to the introduction of the Safe Routes to School requirement, which imposed significant financial burden on the project. It was in that process of discussing that burden with town planning staff, correct? That a concession was made whereby we could potentially compensate for our financial hardship by bringing the building closer to the street, picking up a bit more parking, et cetera.
Okay, so I will have another question for staff on this. Is it your understanding that the safe route to school is a requirement?
Absolutely. It was adopted by ordinance, I believe, in December or November of 2016, just before we applied for the commercial project, and I don't believe we were given an option to opt out. I think, had we? I don't know. I haven't had the discussion with my client, but it certainly imposed a significant delay in our application because we had to do a full redesign, not only off-site but on-site to accommodate it, and there's a significant financial expense to implement the rebuilding of that whole intersection.
Okay, because in your letter of May 31st, you state that the safe, that you've agreed to comply with it for the safety of the community, and that you comply with the request, but you still maintain the required setback, and you say you believe we've complied with the intent when you take into consideration those requirements. So I just wanted to understand whether you consider the safe routes to be a requirement for an application at this time.
I haven't led to believe otherwise. Furthermore, I believe that the whole notion of intent is an important one for the commission to consider. As we pointed out with our measurements that we took of other two-story buildings from their face of respective curb, we're right in line with that, and I believe that's what gave staff the comfort to recommend approval of this reduced setback, because our setback to curb, not property line, is very much in line with other adjacent, nearby properties, not adjacent.
Okay, thanks. I'm sure I'll have some other questions after we hear from the public.
Sure.
Does anyone have further questions? Okay, I'd like to, you will have an opportunity. Yes, Commissioner O'Donnell.
I want to find out whether you're reserving, the next question was what the staff thinks, whether it was required, or is that going to come up later?
I plan to ask staff that
Yeah,
later
so
when
that's
we're
fine,
in
sure.
deliberation, so, yeah. Okay, so we're now at the rest of the public speaking, and since there are a number of people, I'm going to read 3 names so that you can plan for your turn. The first card I have is Catherine Parker, followed by Jeffrey Barnett, and then Barbara Dodson. So, Ms. Parker, could you come forward, please? Thank you.
Catherine Parker. I live at 16475 Ferris Avenue, very near this proposed building. I'm very much against this building. It doesn't conform with many of the basic design principles regarding setbacks, views, reflection of Los Gatos qualities of small scale and pedestrian friendliness. A 30-foot wall looming up against the sidewalk is neither small scale nor friendly. This may be appropriate for the downtown part of Los Gatos, but not Los Gatos Boulevard, especially where, as this is a corner where the guidelines say that the building should be limited to 1 story. Many of the neighboring buildings are 2-story, but most of them are set well back from the sidewalk. This is right up next to the sidewalk, and You know, if you're walking down the sidewalk, there's a wall right there. And most of the other buildings, I believe, other than maybe the Yoga Source building, have extensive landscaping between the sidewalk and the building. This looks like it's just going to have some sort of little planter things. Let's see, also the north end facing their driveway is a big blank wall. The architect recommended covering it with a trellis, which I believe they did do, or a series of trellises. But that's just going to make it a big green blank wall instead of a brown blank wall. As for restricting the views, this afternoon I drove south on Los Gatos Boulevard, checking out where the story poles are. Once I got near that building, I could see, assuming the story poles are where they're going to be, the total view of the mountains is totally blocked out until you get pretty much up to the corner of Shannon and Los Gatos Boulevard. Putting the second story back is not going to open up the view at all. So if that is a consideration, anyway, as I say, I'm very much against this. I think it would be a great building for downtown, but not Los Gatos Boulevard. This is not going to fit in at all with any of the surrounding buildings. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay. Jeffrey Barnett, followed by Barbara Dodson, and then Paul Grams.
Good evening, Chair Hudis and members of the Commission. Jeffrey Barnett, 101 Wallen Way. I'm here tonight speaking on my own behalf, but also on behalf of a number of my neighbors, many of whom are here, the Durhams of 100 Wallen Way, the Yarns of 108 Ann Arbor Court, the Lawrences of 16140 Shannon, the High Streets at 104 Ann Arbor Court, and the Moores at 107 Wallen Way. The focus of our concern is the setback. We assert that the PD overlay zone that would allow the minimal setback, the deviation from the standard setback, should be based on findings of harmony with the surrounding neighborhood. The building under construction has only a nominal 5-foot setback, which is not consistent with other buildings on the boulevard, which has been pointed out. By the way, I submitted a desk item, and I'm hoping that you have that. Good. It's our further position that the Los Gatos Boulevard plan is not in compliance, or the project's not in compliance with the plan. The vision statement in the Boulevard plan has a goal of preserving the essence, the character of the town. The limited setback modifies the character of the boulevard. There are generous setbacks on most of the other buildings on the boulevard that create a relaxed appearance. The proposal is for a large structure that makes for a cramped streetscape, and we would state that it's more appropriate on El Camino Real and Mountain View or Sunnyvale. The commercial guidelines should be followed. They stress the importance of a strong landscaped setback. The guidelines generally require a 15-foot landscape setback, and the plan obviously does not do that. It's our further position that the general plan must be complied with. The project's inconsistent with it because it is not of the type and intensity of land use that's required to be consistent with the immediate neighborhood. And the other buildings on the corner and throughout the boulevard have generous setbacks as noted. So the proposed building is incongruous. Finally, we suggest that there be no negative declaration. The aesthetic detriments of the project are a ground for finding that there's adverse impacts on the environment, and the community opposition to the proposal based on aesthetic grounds is a basis for denial of the negative declaration. I have a summary, but I can't do it in 3 seconds, so I'll pass. Thank you very much.
There may be some questions. Are there questions, Mr. Barnett? I had a question. We had testimony earlier from the applicant that the set, and he cited several buildings on the boulevard, all of which had around a 25-foot or so setback, and then showed that the project had a 24-foot 8-inch setback or something like that, approximately 25 feet as well. Did you see that testimony, and do you have any reaction to that? Do you think that it's accurate that this project, the setback will be the same as those other buildings?
My thought on that would be to rely on the staff report that says the PD proposal is necessary because of the reduction of at least 10 feet in the setback. So I'm not clear how the applicant can state that it's equivalent to others. I assume maybe there's a difference between the property line and the curb.
Okay, thank you. We can follow up with the applicant later.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay. Yeah, Commissioner O'Donnell.
When you thought you had 3 seconds, you had 30 seconds. So was there something that you wanted to get out in a short period of time? I think you misunderstood how much time you had left.
Oh, I saw 3 seconds.
Well, when the light
30
comes on, you have
seconds?
30.
Okay.
So if you had something important you wanted to say, I just wanted to invite you to say it.
Well, I just wanted to summarize that it's the developer's obligation to propose construction that conforms with the general plan and the commercial guidelines in the boulevard plan. Cost considerations were mentioned as a factor in the developer's decision to move closer to Los Gatos Boulevard. And it seems to me the priority should be for the town to enforce its own policies and ordinances rather than the developer's pocketbook.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Have a card for Barbara Dodson, followed by Paul Grams, and those are the only cards that I have on this topic. So if anyone else would like to speak, please just fill out a card and provide it to our staff. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Dotson, and I live on Marchmont Drive in Los Gatos. I ask you to reject the current plan for the following reasons. First, the setback from the sidewalk is insufficient. The 5-foot setback being proposed along Los Gatos Boulevard is too small to create an attractive green space between the sidewalk and the building. Please require a wider setback, at least 15 feet. Second, the 2-story building blocks residents' view of the mountains. A 1-story building would be much more appropriate for this site. There is little reason for the 2nd story in the current Los Gatos market in any case, since we don't seem to have much need for new office space. On the other hand, we have a continuing need to retain the beauty of our town. The beauty of our town is largely created by being able to see the mountains from all viewpoints. I'm also concerned about the loss of a dedicated right turn lane on Shannon and the loss of the 3rd lane on Los Gatos Boulevard. I believe this will create new traffic congestion at the corner of Shannon and Los Gatos Boulevard, and is a bad idea. I understand this is a proposal of safe routes to school, but I really believe it is a bad idea. And I wonder if I can get clarification on this requirement, the safe routes to school requirement, if that's just something we have to live with because it's been, adjudicated, it's been passed, what it means. So thank you.
We will have opportunity to ask staff questions later as the commission deliberates. So thank you. Okay. Paul Grams and then Roy Moses.
Planning Commission, thank you. Just have a few comments here. First of all, this huge 30-feet high building in a residential area, which is occupied on 2.5 sides by residents, is opposed by all the residents. And it's just only to generate more profit for the developer. I don't know why this is being done. I looked at these very biased reports. I presume these reports were paid for by the developer. Is that true? All these studies?
We don't have the ability to respond to you at this point in the hearing.
Well,
we can take notes and we can ask staff questions later.
I was under these reports are very biased. I was very surprised to see that they have 4 pictures of the dumpster behind the quaint 1-story wine shop and other very disparaging photographs just to make things look bad. Right now, that nice wine shop looks very nice, one story, fits in very well, and just had these really awful photos. The setback of 5 feet is just outrageous and seems to the only purpose is to increase rich developers' profits at their expense of the residents. And this is just, in fact, when I drove down Los Gatos Boulevard, and I actually stepped that off, went from the sidewalk in, and I couldn't see another structure along Los Gatos Boulevard that had such a short distance from the curb or the sidewalk. And this, once again, just to increase developer profits. If he had a subterranean garage, he could allow parking underneath and maybe set back more and have the same structure size. But subterranean garages are somewhat expensive, but still, we're not here to generate rich developer profits. Also, it add value to the future also. I don't know who put the traffic study together. Can I show something on this projector?
Yes, if you have a page. No, it's not working. Unfortunately, it's not working. Is this something that was in any submission that you made to us earlier?
Well, no, but let me just show you briefly.
Okay.
This is Los Gatos Boulevard, and this is Roberts. Under the proposed plan. Okay. Yes, on the proposed plan, it shows the students now only have to cross one way to reach Van Meter and Los Gatos High and even Fisher. Under the proposal plan, they're going to have to cross. It's going to be moved over here at the crosswalk, so they have to cross Los Gatos Boulevard, and then to go south, they have to cross Roberts, and that's a major congestion. So it exposes the students to 2 significant traffic highways. So I don't see the benefit of moving the crosswalk over here.
If you'd like to provide me the document, I can pass it down to commissioners. Thank you. Okay, Roy Moses. And that is the last card that I have on this.
Evening, Council. Thank you for allowing us to come and speak. I live at 16529 LaCroix Court, which is up Shannon Road a little ways. I live in Los Gatos a long time. I work in Los Gatos, so I go through that intersection many times during the day, and especially during the time when the kids are going to school and coming back from school. I try not to time that because it's pretty congested. And I do respect the rights of developers to develop their properties and to build something significant and to make money at it. They have to be profitable. But at the same time, we've got to take into consideration all the people that live around that. It is right next to a residential district. The thing that I don't understand, to me, common sense is the most important thing. So to me, it's like the building is right out front, right on the sidewalk. That's like the butt of the building, and all the parking is going to be on the interior. Now, maybe that's the way it has to be built to be economical. I don't know. But at the same time, all these considerations about the scenery here in Los Gatos, the town of Los Gatos, has always been try to keep that take that into consideration. So why can't the building be put back? There has underground parking or whatever, and make it more aesthetic. You can see the mountains that way. You don't have a problem. The other big issue right now is taking out that right lane. Now, I don't know if you go by there, if the developers have gone by there in the morning. Kids are kids. I like to call them children, but we call them kids. They're not very responsible or thinking about getting hit or whatever. They do not walk. They walk right on the edge of the road, and a lot of people drive through there. They don't have the consideration maybe that the neighbors have because they're coming out of the Shannon Road mountains. They're coming from Almaden Valley, coming through Shannon Road, which is the main corridor. They don't come down Kennedy Road. They come down Shannon from Almaden, come through here, and it's a cut through going to their work, wherever it may be, past Los Gatos, I don't know. But you cannot jeopardize those kids by taking out that lane. They talk about, and the point was just made about where they're going to move the crosswalk. That is a double crossing for those kids. Now come there during the day when the kids are there and take a look for yourself. It's not a very good situation, and it's going to get worse by the proposals that are being made here. So I'm for the developers, but I think you've got to go back put the building back in the back of the lot, put your parking, figure it out. Architects they're magicians. They do wonderful things. So, but there's going to be a lot of objections here. And if it wasn't the end of school year, and if it wasn't vacation time, and I love the way the developers plan all these meetings where we can't get everybody here. I mean, I was, again, I saw the story polls go up. I'm here. So anyway, go to work, do your job for the city, for the citizens of the city, do it for the developers. Put their heads together. Maybe they ought to go talk to the neighbors. Maybe we got some good suggestions for them. I don't know. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay. That's the last card that I have from the public. So we will now move back to the applicant to address any questions that have been raised or anything actually that the applicant would like to speak about. And there's 5 minutes to add further comments. So Mr. Sakai or whoever would like to speak for the applicant, you have an additional 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll start with the setbacks. And it's probably not clear to the community, but when you walk out there, the curb has not been moved 10 feet, so it looks pretty extreme. So relative to the existing story poles and the netting. And so the dimensions that I pulled from the field were measured from face of curb to building. Just forgetting the term setback to property line. It's just, at the end of the day, the property line where it sits isn't super critical. It's what distance you have from building to curb. And so I'll give you an example. This project has about, I think, a 7-foot property line to face a curb currently. So once it's done, the face of the glazing of the building is like another 17.5 feet behind that property line. I'm sorry, that's not true. I'm sorry, the curb moves out 10 feet from there. So from face of curb to property line, that's going to be your 17 feet. And so then the building is closer to the property line, and you end up with your 25-ish feet. If you go down north to Edwards, that has only about an 8-foot from face of curb to property line, and then they're set back the code required 15 to get them to the 23 minimum. But they're at 23, and we're at closer to 25. So the property line is what's confusing matters here. The other thing that I think is important to note, unlike most of the other buildings that are 2-story, this one is stepped back considerably. So when we first looked at this project and it was in conformance, we were at a 15-foot setback with a 2-story building coming pretty much vertical at 15 feet, and that was deemed in conformance. What we have now, we've moved the first floor 10 feet forward with the curb. So we didn't change that situation. And actually, we only moved it 9.5 feet. So we're 6 inches further set back from the future curb than we were in the prior development, proposed development. And the second story actually moved back about 1.5 feet. So with that offset, the views are actually better than had we built straight up and down at the 15-foot with the existing street. So it's a little confusing, but the point being is it's extremely consistent with the neighborhood. And I'm just going to stop on that for now. The removal of the pork chop islands and the narrowing of the lanes, and that's all a safe routes to school requirement. So it's not, I mean, it's actually a very good thing. The traffic consultant can speak to it, but
Sir, I wonder if you'd address your comments to the commission, please.
It improves the traffic flow. It reduces the length that the kids are in the crosswalk. It purposely moves the crosswalk to align with the Roberts, where there's a larger vehicle flow, so it makes the whole intersection more efficient. But it's also very expensive. When I priced it, it was about $750, and construction's gone up like 20%. I'm not exaggerating. So now it's more like $900,000, and that's a very small building he's proposing. He could put a 60,000 square foot building there, but he's putting I don't know the number committed to memory, but it's like 11,000. So it's pretty much the smallest project he could afford to build with those new $900,000 add-on. So all the safe route to school items they're not in our control. They have to be done, and they're actually improvements. We can't move the building to the back and put the parking up front. That's just not current kind of planning that staff would support. That's kind of an old school approach. It's more about bringing the building forward and enlivening the streets. But so that's. And I think geometrically, when we were talking about the building corner and how it does it improve the views of the mountains? Well, it used to wrap around 2-story vertically, and pulling it back wouldn't have done, to your point, it wouldn't have done much to that angle. But it was with the building stepped back and it pulled back. It definitely improves that view of the mountains there. And the building on the north end was reduced significantly at the second level as well. So it's not the box it used to be. I mean, it's dramatically reduced in all dimensions to improve the views and just the aesthetics.
Okay. Anything else? I'm afraid not. We've closed that portion of the hearing. We will ask questions of the applicant, and I think there may be some. So, Commissioner Bodami?
If you could come back. All right, so I heard you say that you could not consider moving it back, correct? Is that what I heard?
Moving what back?
The building back. It's got to be in the front, placed in that property.
Yeah, economically, if we move it back any more than it is now, we lose parking, which loses square footage of the building, which kills the project because of the $900,000 add at the kind of the 11th hour. Alternatively, you would have to go to the mega building and go underground parking. You can't afford to do underground parking on 11,000 square foot building. It's just not feasible. So you'd have to go big or without the underground.
With that being said, could you consider a one-story building?
You could. I would have to say at some point there's an economic involved because I'm obviously not the owner, but the land was purchased and it's valued based on what they could put there. And this is probably this is definitely the smallest building they can build without getting into a lot of trouble with what they paid for the land. And if they were asked to put a one-story building there, I'm sure they would have to come back and just go big and be within, no PD, just be within the town's requirements, setbacks, floor area ratio, height. They could park it underground and just, they'd have to max it out. And that's not what they want to do. So this was kind of the trade-off, moving it forward 10 feet with the curb moving 10 feet with the issue that the property line didn't move. Had the town moved the property line with the curb face, which they could do, we wouldn't have a problem. But that wasn't the case, so.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Birch.
I know you guys have run through a lot of scenarios, but I want to just ask some questions to make sure I'm clear on where we're at today and how we got here. In some previous, I believe, CDAC meetings, it was discussed that underground parking would be approved, or not approved, but would be beneficially looked upon. And in looking, because I understand what you're saying, if you lose parking spaces, you lose square footage. But in, taking a look at the overall plan, if you did integrate even partial, a smaller underground lot, you technically could move the building back, but probably have a larger footprint, therefore square footage, and perhaps if it was pushed to the back, a well-designed second story. So I'm wondering, when you ran the numbers, how that offset in that decision-making.
Yeah, I think the misconception is that underground parking, it's
expensive. It's about $150 a square foot. Yeah,
it's generally about, this is a number I have from a year ago, so it's probably more, but I usually say $50,000 per stall. So it doesn't pay for itself unless you go multiple stories above that footprint. So it's really difficult. And the other thing you'll never see is an underground parking structure that's fully depressed. I know there's some that are semi-depressed in the town, that's fully depressed with ramp and underneath the building that's, 15, 20 stalls. It's just so expensive. At that point, it's, $120,000 a stall or something. So it's just extremely cost prohibitive. And then when you're doing the numbers, you start to look at it and say, well, we have to go big. It's either the building you see now that's more efficient to construct with surface parking, and then you jump over to let's underground park the whole thing and go big. So the in-between is very difficult to pencil.
Okay, can I ask a follow-up question?
Of course.
Then in that same vein, you're keeping the existing building. Was there any look at maybe modifying that building to include a second story or add some size to that to then keep the building at the street single story for the most part?
I'm not an architect, but I'm just going to guess that building would be easier just to tear down. It would be so
That was
expensive
probably
to
gonna
go
be my
second
next
story,
question.
and it's pretty small, and it's, new code, old code, no fire sprinklers, et cetera.
I'll speak to that a little bit. I think there's two things at play with regard to how the building is sited. I think, first of all is the Boulevard Plan itself talks about trying to enhance a pedestrian realm. The Safe Routes to School, I think, is part of that whole general movement.
I'm very specifically trying to understand the
And I'm
process that you
speaking to
went
that
through
as well.
different steps to get here. I know all
I'm
those.
speaking
I
to
read
that.
them all the time. I just
Okay.
want to understand that.
All right, I'm trying to address that.
Okay.
So with regard to the siting of the building, which I believe was your question, is that your question? Why is the building sited the way it is?
More, I want to understand the different avenues of making this project work for you and maybe different options you looked at. So, for example, let's say you have a building on this corner, but you're keeping the existing building. So I wanted to understand if you guys did an analysis on either rebuilding that building and adding on to it, making it the second story component and keeping the building at the street single story. Probably not a win-win for everyone, but it gives you that, keeps the views that people are worried about. Like, would there be a trade-off there, but did you run those numbers and do that analysis?
I mean, that building is 2,300 square feet. It's the size of an average single-family home. It has a sloping roof, still slopes in pretty severely. I would imagine if we tried to develop a second floor there, that second floor might be somewhere in the range of about 600-700 square feet. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So I think that was one factor. I think the other factor was, as was mentioned by some of the community members, we were trying to lessen the impact along the interior property lines where we have a residential single-family interface. And so by pulling the building away from those houses, reducing the amount of commercial activity or limiting it to really what has been historically there in just that 2,300 square foot building, we felt that was the best way to be a good neighbor,
Okay,
as well as tying into the Boulevard Plan, which
Okay.
I mentioned at the outset.
that makes sense. Thank you.
I had some questions about architecture. Could you maybe describe the architecture of the building, the style, and discuss how it is compatible with other Los Gatos Boulevard development in the vicinity, and maybe specifically what are some cohesive design elements so that this fits with other buildings that are in the proximity?
Sure. Well, we looked pretty closely at the adjacent properties, the overall context. There's a variety of projects that were built over a variety of years and a variety of styles. There's just a lot of diversity. I think probably our strongest cue that we took was the existing building on site. It has a bit of a craftsman feel to it. It has stucco. It has some stone on it. And so as part of the decision to keep that building as part of this overall development, I would say that informed some of the design thinking. Our building has a pitched roof on it, kind of as a nod to that existing quasi-residential commercial building that's there, and then some of the same materials. Yet at the same token, we didn't want to fully mimic or ape that building's architecture. So there is some consistency and yet some differences. We looked at the overall heights of the buildings in the area, and as was pointed out, we've also looked at the setbacks from curb. So there are a lot of two-story buildings around. Some of them don't have a second-floor setback as ours does. So we didn't mimic any one building in particular. It was more of a holistic look.
Okay. And where did you come down on the awning suggestion from Mr. Cannon?
Sure.
Is that included or not?
I'd say we met him halfway. The suggestion there was really to do a 360-degree awning approach on all sides of the building, pretty much, including at the glass corner, which we opted out of that because we felt, as opposed to putting some easily destructible, readily fadable canvas material right there on the corner, why not do something more substantial and long-lasting, like a stone portal as an architectural feature, as opposed to some fabric, curving fabric. So we chose to put awnings on, I'd say, maybe half of the locations that he suggested.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Commissioner O'Donnell?
In listening to the conversation, when the safe routes to schools came down, it took a big chunk of the front of the property. As I understand it, it was your understanding that was mandatory. Is that right? And how much, quantify for me, how much of what you would have otherwise been able to use was taken from you?
Actually, there was no property taken because the property line didn't move. So we have the same property. What did move was just the curb. So now the city's eliminated a lane, and in place of it, we put a landscape strip, a 10-foot sidewalk, and then another strip up to the building. So what I was explaining earlier was the safe routes to school requires replacement of traffic signals, building the new curb and gutter, and doing some significant improvements to the public right-of-way to the tune of about $900,000. So the take there was for this project to get to pencil, we needed to add like 3 parking stalls to get some more. Well, that's all we really could by moving the building a little. I was able to get like 3 more parking stalls, which enabled the building to grow a little bit. And it's clearly well below what it could be. But that was how the owner developer was able to move forward with the project. Because if we couldn't do that, it was probably a dead project because it's.
I'm being obtuse, I suppose, but I would like to understand this, and I still don't. The safe routes obviously was a change of pace for you. It came down sort of either last minute or past last minute.
Correct.
And it had an effect on you, and you're telling us it cost essentially another $900,000, right? But that's for improvements, but I'm wondering what, if any, of the property, your property, was impacted so that you could not otherwise use it as you would have planned. Are you saying none?
The only impact of the property would be the wider sidewalks onto the property on Shannon. There was a 10-foot walk there. Originally, we were an attached 10-foot walk on Shannon with tree wells. And in the end, we ended up with a 5-foot planter strip and the 10-foot walk pushing into the project. Did it move the parking? Did it change the building shape? No, it just kind of constricted it. But so to
Summarize.
answer your original question, the property, the developable property has not changed because of the safe routes. It's it was a improvement out in Los Gatos Boulevard and at the Pork Chop Islands, the front corner. I mean, it did a lot of different things to the public, view of the project itself, but it didn't take any land per se.
I think I understand it. Just to summarize it, then you're saying that it's the cost, and that certainly is a lot of money, $900,000. The project ended up costing $900,000 more than it otherwise would have.
Correct.
But as far as the size of the land is concerned, the usable land, that was not impacted.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
If I might follow up on that, is that because the town has allowed another 10 feet to be used of the boulevard?
I'm sorry, could you clarify that
My
question?
understanding is that the curb moves out 10 feet into the boulevard. Is that why you were able to do that without changing the developable area? Because you're getting that 10 feet?
Yeah, we wouldn't have been able to move the building 10 feet forward and go through the PD process if the curb hadn't moved also. So we haven't changed the dimension from the face of the glazing of the building to the face of curb. It's actually like 6 inches further than it used to be. But the building has followed the new curb line out as the lane dropped.
I see. Okay, that's very helpful to me. You provided some slides at the beginning of the presentation that I frankly couldn't read from here, and I think the public may have had difficulty. Were those included in the packet, in your application?
The previous versions that we looked at?
No, the first several slides of your presentation where you showed the setbacks.
The first ones?
Keep going. Where you had dimensions on a drawing.
Okay, yeah, that's actually quite a ways in, but I'll get that.
They're quite small. I could not read the numbers.
Yeah, I'm used to a bigger projector.
Are those, yeah.
Projections.
Are those documents that you've provided us that you could point us to that we could see?
In not that particular graphic, but certainly our site plan has all this information. This is not a new design. This is the design that is reflected on the plans before you.
Okay. So we can find that information on the site plan itself. That's the one I'm talking about.
Right. I did this because I felt it would be more illustrative for the commission as to what that's going to really look like as opposed to just looking at a black and white drawing. But
sure,
what you see is reflective of the black and white site plans behind you and at your desk.
Okay, thank you.
To kind of clarify the property line, is somewhere, let's see, somewhere back here. Yeah, it's somewhere back here. So it didn't move, and the curb used to be here. And when the curb moved 10 feet, the property line remained back here. That's why the setback of 5 feet is actually measured from this fur out, and it's really, a couple more feet to the real building. So it's, that's kind of the history of the property line, but.
Okay. That's helpful. I can get it without seeing the numbers. Thank you. Are there other questions? Okay, let me just check my list here. So on the corner issue, you feel that you complied with Mr. Cannon's suggestion to increase the visibility of the hillside by the way you've designed the corner of that building. I think he stated that the corner should be 1 story. And do you feel that you've complied with that?
I don't specifically remember him saying the corner should be 1 story.
I believe that's in the hillside design guidelines.
Sure. What Mr. Cannon provided us, and I neglected to include it in my presentation, but he provided a suggested floor plan for the second floor. He went so far as to recommend an outline of the second floor at the corner, and we followed that drawing that he provided.
Okay, thank you. I will be having some questions on the traffic and the traffic impact for staff, but there was one point that I wanted to ask. In the TDM document, which is Appendix E, the consultants say that provision of a free local shuttle service similar to the one being offered by the Office Development at 401 Alberta Way can also be considered as part of the TDM plan. Did you consider providing or supporting an existing shuttle service?
I don't think so. I'm not familiar with, I don't recall that being something that we agreed to, but.
Okay. It was a suggestion in the TDM.
Yeah, we're compliant with parking, so it wasn't like we were against it, but the project's compliant, it self-parks.
I understand this is not a parking issue, it's a traffic issue, which I will have some questions about traffic on
But
the
I think
TDM.
we also reduced traffic with this development relative to what was previously approved on the project, that being the dealership, the historical uses.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. Anyone else? Okay. We will now, thank you very much. We will now close the public portion of the hearing and ask if commissioners have any questions of staff or wish to comment. Commissioner Badami.
I'll comment, and I'm going back to this town architect's report because there seems to be some discrepancy or some misunderstanding about the blocking of the views. So he did provide approach A, which meant eliminating the second floor development at the corner. Approach B stated, should staff decide, blah, 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 that the blockage of views to the hills would be minor, you could make these modifications, which is holding the second floor back at the corner. But I don't know what staff decided, but ultimately it comes to us and we make our decisions. And I don't see that the blocking of the hills, the views, is minor by any means. To the applicant's credit, he came back with a commercial project as opposed to a residential project. That's more befitting for this location. However, we can't make our decisions based upon economic feasibility. So for me, I'm just having a real problem with the blocking of the views. I mean, we look at the vision statement and the general plan, and it says what makes Los Gatos special. Well, it's a strong sense of place. And what makes a strong sense of place? Well, a major component of that is the backdrop of the mountains. And we all hate being stuck in traffic. When you're traveling southbound, as a lot of us go home, the one palatable thing you have about being stuck in traffic is you can look at the backdrop of the mountains and you know that you're almost home. And there's some comfort in viewing that. And that's what makes us a special place. So I'm having a difficult time with the blocking of views. It's a major thing for me at this point.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner O'Donnell?
I'm concerned with the traffic. And it seems to me what's being done there, removing the pork chop there and that kind of thing, and removing one lane of traffic. The traffic is already awful everywhere, and how it gets better by removing a lane eludes me. It gets worse. So I guess I go back to a fundamental issue. There's some ambiguity now as to whether this is mandatory, that this route affect not only this project, but I suppose other projects. Their understanding is they had no discretion here. They had to comply with a mandatory requirement. So I'd like to ask you, was this a mandatory requirement? Or was it a requirement? In other words, requirements are mandatory.
Yes, hi. Mike Weiss, Associate Engineer. In reviewing the video from the October 18, 2016 Town Council meeting, there was specific discussion about this very project and this very intersection. The question was asked if these improvements would be required with a future development project. The answer is and was yes. So the improvements listed in this report improve the safety of school children who bike and walk to school. The removal of the pork chop island, the widening of the sidewalk, the relocation of the crosswalk, those all help to improve the safety. It shortens the crossing distance, as was mentioned previously, for children. It was noted in different reports that there's clusters of students who walk along both Shannon and Los Gatos Boulevard, so the widening of the sidewalk for both those frontages will help with that. I believe there was discussion during that same council meeting that the current pork chop island configuration doesn't allow for enough of a safe zone for large portions of students who cross the street to reside without being in the vehicular traffic areas.
So there is an ordinance somewhere that says, to me, it's a form of a taking, because you're saying, we don't care what it costs, this is what you're going to do. And in this case, it's $900,000 at some point in time, and depending how long it takes, it'll go up. So there is an ordinance, and someplace it says what you're saying. Is that correct?
The council reviewed and approved the report. I don't believe there was an ordinance, but there was, during their discussion, direction to implement these for future development projects.
Well, I guess I'll defer to council. I don't understand how you could make something mandatory that there's no ordinance and the council says it'd be a great idea, let's do it. So what is it that we rely on to be able to enforce this?
I'm going to answer, and then I'm also going to ask Mr. Paulson to weigh in. But it's my understanding that the safe routes concept was accepted by the council and is contemplated as being part of the bike pedestrian master plan. There is not an ordinance on it.
No. You've got all kinds of master plans, but it doesn't make it an ordinance, it doesn't make it enforceable. And yet, we have a certain ambiguity here. The applicant believes it was mandatory. Apparently you do too, but I'm asking a lawyer, what is it we rely on for that? And so far, I have not gotten an answer that I would go to court with, but perhaps I will.
Well, I would say I'm not a lawyer, and you probably won't get an answer that you will want to take to court. But the town council did, in fact, as Ms. Lampros mentioned, adopt the bicycle pedestrian master plan, which does include a number of improvements from the Safe Routes to School project. What I would say is if that there is a concern on part of the Planning Commission that maybe in this instance those improvements shouldn't be required, then that can always be part of any recommendation that moves forward. Regarding the nexus and whether it's tied to an ordinance, it is not tied to an ordinance, and we can get further clarification on that as well.
I think it's a great idea, and I'd like to see it everywhere. All I'm saying is it's driving this project. And we got a lot of people that don't like this project. And yet we're hearing from the applicant, part of the reason why the project is the way it is because we are forced to spend $900,000 on something that we have decided is not in an ordinance. It was a good idea that the council thought was a good idea. And I'm just saying someday somebody may raise that question, is it enforceable? In fact, it might be sooner than later. And so, no, I'm not against the safe routes, but in fact, I'm in favor of it. But to the extent that it now sandwiches what we're talking about with this requirement, I get very nervous about it. If we were to say we don't like your project because of what the safe routes does to it, and they said, fine, we'll save the $900,000 and spend it on something else, we might have an answer here that would help the citizens sitting right here. But then people would come unglued because a lot of effort has gone into safe routes. But so I ask, what's the law here? And I'm getting an answer that beats me.
It's a nexus requirement. The answer is that there would be a nexus requirement analysis.
But there's no finding here that the nexus of this is what is being required of this applicant. We know that. To me, it's a great lawsuit.
So, okay. So it sounds like we may either need some more information from the town attorney before you would be comfortable with supporting something like this.
Here, I mean, I'm representing the town.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that when I get to stand, there's some things we don't like about this project. But on the other hand, $900,000 is something that the applicant could say, gosh, we're doing all these things and you're laying all these costs on us. So we get torn between trying to make everybody happy. And so I just want to make sure if I shake something, it's going to withstand that. And very frankly, what I've heard tonight, not shake-proof.
Commissioner Birch.
I'm going to add on to that, and then I have a couple comments. I think on that same vein, however, and understanding that as how much is it impacting, we would need to understand how many parking spaces could go away and how much square footage could go away to offset that, and how would that aesthetically look? We may be making this statement and opening, I think just opened up a can of worms, for a minimal difference in the overall project. It's possible. We don't know. So I'm saying that we don't have, we have one value, we don't have the offsetting value. And I think that that is.
We're not going to get it either.
I know.
That's the
I'm
problem
just
I have.
Putting it out there. I have a couple more comments to make.
Please go ahead.
So these corner lots on Los Gatos Boulevard are incredibly difficult. What we wind up with is, I think we've gone back and forth on other projects. Is it to the back of the property? Is it to the front of the property? But what we do ultimately have here, we do not measure from the curb. We measure from the property line. We have a request here for a PD that allows for a lesser setback. I understand that aesthetically, that probably won't look like what we think it will, because we do have this additional curb and bike lane. However, that instance of creating this extra depth isn't going all the way up and down the boulevard. This is a one-off, unique situation. And I think we need to be careful as we, as a planning commission, look at this and saying, do we want to start allowing these really reduced setbacks down the boulevard? Because by having that, we're basically going against a list of design principles that have been spelled out for us. Somebody spent a lot of time with what the setbacks should be. That buildings located on corners should generally be limited to 1 story. The requirements for landscaping to soften between the building. So that's my worry here. I'm not even going to get into like architectural or anything, because I think the overreaching thing we have to decide is, are we comfortable with starting down that path? And I'm not. And I mean, obviously, I'm not going to speak about the views. I think everyone else can speak about the views. But I just think ultimately we've been given a list that we're supposed to look at, and we're not hitting a number of those.
Okay. I had a question, if I may, of staff relating to traffic. The first area I wanted to cover on traffic is the lane change. So my understanding, tell me if I'm correct, the curb will move 10 feet to the west. Is that correct? Into an existing lane of Los Gatos Boulevard.
Approximately, yes.
Okay. So do we expect that to help traffic on Los Gatos Boulevard to have this one property with a curb that's 10 feet and eliminating a lane?
So again, this is something that came from the Safe Routes to School report that we all have already mentioned, but with us here today is our traffic peer review consultant, Chris Kinzel from TJ Chem, and he can speak to that.
Good evening. Nice to be here. Chris Kinzel at TJ Chem. We did a peer review of the applicant's traffic study in conjunction with the city staff. That was our role on the project. I wasn't involved with or knew about this Safe Route to School project before I worked on this project. But in my opinion, it's a very positive thing for the city, not only for pedestrians, but also for vehicular traffic along the street. That lane that's being eliminated is a lane that just started at that point. On the approach to that intersection, there's 2 lanes. On the far side, it's 3 lanes now, one of which is being taken away. I think the reason that 3rd lane was there is because there's a free right turn lane coming from Shannon onto Los Gatos Boulevard. And so that's a natural place for traffic coming from Shannon to go. On the other hand, that apparently has created some problems because the city has installed a sign that says no right turn on red. So in effect, there's no function of that free right turn lane anymore. You can only go when you have a green light, and when you have a green light, the other street has a red light, so you've got an empty street of traffic going through there. So it's from a traffic standpoint, it's probably better, but from a pedestrian standpoint, it's dramatically better. The pedestrians now, and there's about 100 of pedestrians, school-age pedestrians in the morning, have to cross the street there, and the first 12 to 15 feet is unprotected. There's nothing there to keep them from traffic other than one sign that says no turn on red, and people's natural inclination to not run into pedestrians. But now, in the after condition, the crosswalk will slide toward Roberts about 50 or 60 feet and be sort of connected with that signal, that intersection, rather than the Shannon signal. There's less going on there, so it's a better situation. It doesn't require, as was reported earlier, pedestrians to cross any more streets or anything. They're just sliding down closer to where they want to be anyway. So that's an improvement by creating that. And that lane that's been eliminated, the third lane that just starts right there, only goes another couple blocks, and then it stops. It becomes a mandatory right turn lane. So there's no traffic capacity reduced as a result of that lane being taken away. It reduces the confusion at the intersection, in my opinion.
Okay, but there's a lane that is continuous from Shannon until the next large intersection.
That's right. It's about three blocks.
So for a portion of that, whatever the frontage is of this property, that lane will be eliminated and then it'll come back again. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And is that a good practice for traffic flow, to eliminate a lane and then bring it back again?
Well, in one sense, it's not eliminating a lane. It's just extending the two-lane section.
But it's three
one
lane.
more block.
It's 3 lane.
No,
isn't
I
it?
mean it's only 2 lanes approaching the intersection, 3 lanes beyond. And when you get and it's that third lane that's just been added that's being taken away. So through traffic just is unaffected by that.
Have you
the only
observed-
people that are affected by that are the people coming from Shannon, and they still have the same number of lanes, one right and one left.
But there's several hundred feet of capacity on the boulevard that's being eliminated.
There's
Correct.
several hundred feet of pavement, yes, and you can call it capacity.
And have you seen the traffic there? Do you know whether that lane is actually used or not? Or are you saying that lane is not used, it doesn't matter?
It's not heavily used because there's nobody that would be using it for the first, other than the people that are coming from Shannon. And so when you're coming from Shannon and the lane's not there, there's still 2 lanes to turn into.
Okay, and when did you make that observation? Is that on the February 2018 part of the TIA? Or was that in the October? I believe there were 2.
Our role was the peer review of the report itself.
Okay. So again, my question is, when did you observe the lack of traffic in that lane? That lane
I
wasn't
personally was a staff person on my staff that did the field observation of that, so I did not observe it.
Okay. Yes, Commissioner O'Donnell.
I would just like the record to reflect that I've lived in this town, 50 years. I drive that road all the time, and I use that third lane all the time, whether I'm going to go straight ahead or whether I'm going to go right. So I will not use that lane if it's not there. But if you remove part of it, people will be moving over very quickly because then they come to the right turn. So what it's going to do is it's going to cause a real problem with the right turn. And if you observe that and drive it every day, to say that taking that stretch of the road out will not have any impact except on the people turning right is not what is my observation for years. So.
I had a number of questions related to the TIA and the traffic study, are you the right person to answer some of those questions?
I could. The author of that study is here as well, Mr. Black.
Okay. Well, why don't I start with a couple questions then?
See how far I can get.
Okay. When you do a traffic study, if there's a phenomenon that occurs on a periodic basis that's predictable, but somewhat predictable, but you don't know exactly what day, should you attempt to understand that traffic condition when you do the study?
Yes.
Are you aware of the gridlock situation that occurs on good weather days in the summer, some good weather days in the summer and weekends, that causes a backup that can extend from the downtown to approximately 2 miles away?
I've observed that, yes.
Okay. If you included events like that in a traffic study, could the LOS, which is, I believe, rated a C, be actually more like a D or an F if an event like that were included?
It probably would. Most traffic studies, including the city's requirements for a traffic study, are done during sort of standard, normal, everyday, weekday time periods in order to not judge the absolute worst condition, but to judge a more typical situation. So yes, there are times when conditions are worse than the typical weekday.
Okay. What's the right sample size for a traffic study? Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it 5? What's the right sample size?
In what sense?
Days that you evaluate the traffic as part of the study?
Most traffic studies, when we do peak hour counts done during the commute periods, AM and PM, they're done on a single day, and that's a single weekday. And in fact, usually a Tuesday, a Wednesday, or a Thursday, and not a Monday or a Friday or a weekend. And the reason why one is typically acceptable is because the commute periods are somewhat repetitive. They're pretty similar from day to day. When we do a week-long counts with hoses and so on, we can show that there's not much variation from day to day typically.
Okay. But would that also be the case if there are somewhat predictable events that are related to the weather and traffic routing? If you took it on a day that wasn't that particular day, would you catch that fact that there's a gridlock situation going on?
If you did it on one of those days, you certainly would. Again, the city requirements say don't count when it's raining. And part of the main reason for that, I think, is because we only count during the time when schools are in session, and school operations are affected by rainy weather. Traffic seems to increase because more parents are dropping their kids off than typically, and they're moving more slowly because of the weather. And so if we did measure on those days, the conditions would be worse. If we use that as a guideline, that means we'd have lower level of service, and to correct that, you do things that you might not want to do as a city.
Right. So, my concern with this is that we have a situation that is somewhat predictable, but is never captured in the traffic studies that we see. And my concern is that this isn't just an academic exercise, but in fact a serious safety issue for the town. If a gridlock occurs and is coincident with a fire or a personal safety emergency, we're going to have something that is much different than simply an academic exercise or a convenience factor. And My understanding is that the methodology that was used is probably standard and adequate, but the sampling doesn't account for the kind of gridlock situations that we regularly have in town. And so unless I'm incorrect, I think that the study misses that event that's occurring, that where the LOS may in fact be worse than what is reported in the report based on a sampling issue. Any reaction to that?
So the traffic impact policy and the traffic impact analysis requires an analysis of the traffic that's generated by the project. And so what you're referring to is a regional issue. The traffic generated on warm weekends in the summer is not generated by the project, and the TIA studies what effect on traffic the project will have. When in compliance with the traffic impact policy, has been determined that this project does not create a significant impact as defined by the traffic impact policy in the general plan.
But my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that under current ordinances, there must be either mitigation or a development cannot proceed if there's already an unacceptable level of service.
So the level of service as tabled in the traffic impact analysis shows that the project does not lessen the level of service below more than one level or below a D. And that's the measure by which we determine if there is a significant impact. And so by that, and by the general plan, and by the traffic impact policy, it's not a significant impact for the traffic that is generated by this specific project.
Okay, but we did hear testimony that the type of events that occur may not be reflected in the baseline that's being captured to start.
That's 100% accurate, and if you're interested in that data, then we need to have the town council modify the town's traffic impact policy.
Okay, thank you. I'm having trouble accepting a report with a sampling error like that. So are there other comments or questions of staff?
A comment. We're putting ourselves in, I think, a very difficult position because we have this matter before us. And we're dealing with, as perhaps we should, other problems too, but simply dealing with their issues, which is what I came here tonight to do. Some of the things I don't like about the project, I balance against them telling me, gee whiz, we had to pay $950,000 because of something that I find out is questionable. So if we focus merely on merely is the wrong word, if we focus on their project tonight, which I think, unless enough of us feel you can't do that, I'd kind of like to get back to just this project and to see if we could either approve it or disapprove it, or approve it with some conditions. And I guess my concern is that I don't like the changes that that we're making, i.e. the town, to this project. For example, getting rid of that right turn and getting rid of that lane and moving the kids, so they're going to, if you want to go to Fisher, you're going to go across the street, and go across another street, and then you're going to go to Fisher. That's what this is doing to it. I don't know that that's a good idea. So I would just simply invite my fellow commissioners, if we can deal with this project, how would we do it, and let's do it. Or to say we can't do it because of something, and that will then bounce it up to the council, and they can figure out what they want to do.
Okay, thank you. I believe the town attorney would like to speak.
Yes, Commissioner O'Donnell, you brought up some good questions, and I wanted to try to address them a little bit better. As you know, town council doesn't sit in every meeting between an applicant and the planning department, and town council is not an applicant's attorney, it's the town's attorney. So notwithstanding the characterization that came across tonight, I looked to the evidence that's contained in Exhibit 6, which is the May 31st, 2019 letter from STEM. In the last paragraph of the first page, the very last sentence, they note, we have agreed to conform to the proposed off-site improvements for safe routes to school. They goes on to say they believe the cost will be higher than the town's proposal. However, if the town of Los Gatos approves our project, we will complete the work identified for the off-site improvements pertaining to safe routes. This is a major commitment and cost for a project this small. However, they're doing it basically for the good of the community, safety of the children and families, and willing to support the effort. So there's a voluntariness in this document that maybe didn't come across in the presentation.
I heard a quid pro quo. If you approve our project, we will pay you this. I mean, that could be called something else, but it isn't we'll do this for the community good. It is if you approve our project, we will do it. If you don't approve our project, we won't do it. Now, let me tell you, if it's mandatory, under what circumstances is it mandatory? And I think we're hearing that it's kind of mandatory if you have a project. If you don't have a project, then it's not mandatory because you're not doing anything. So that's a classic, but usually that arises out of an ordinance where something is imposed. We don't have that, at least from what you've said. I don't disagree with what you've read, there it is. But it says, if you approve this project, we will do that. And that's a quid pro quo. And if we all, and that's fine. That's the way I would read it too.
Commissioner Badami.
Well, I'll make a comment. I can't design this for the applicant, and there appears to be some major siting issues and some financial parameters that what I'm hearing from the applicant is they might not agree to what we might ask of them because it wouldn't pencil out. So for us trying to do a continuance and say, oh, do this X, Y, and Z, which there might be a lot of X, Y, and Zs, the whole alphabet, that we might be better off denying it. But I'll look to my commissioners for their comments.
Commissioner O'Donnell. Maybe 1 second.
Yes, I'd just like to remind the commission that this is a recommendation to council. So council has the decision on this, and the planning commission would make a recommendation. Thank you.
Thanks.
All I was going to say was it's conceivable to me to approve the project were it changed, right? I mean, I think that's sort of a simple statement because obviously if something's changed, it depends how it's changed. And if we could focus on what we would want changed, then we could determine whether that's something likely to occur or not to occur, or whether it's reasonable or not. The project itself, under the zoning and everything else, they have a certain right to develop that property, and they have a certain density that they can have. I believe they're coming within both of those things. On the other hand, we have a right to ameliorate problems that would otherwise arise. That's what we're going to do. But if we believe that they're not putting in any more square footage than they would be allowed to put in, all those things, then we probably have to, well, somebody will have to approve it. We have an opportunity now to condition it to make it better than it would otherwise be. Or, as you say, we can just say, we recommend to the council they deny it, but if I were the council, I'd say thank you very much, and then I would deal with the problem. I wonder if we're avoiding the problem by saying, oh, goody, we can deny it and let the council worry about it. It's a really tough problem. These people have, I believe, have rights, but so does everybody else in town have rights. And our job, I think, is to see if we can balance those rights. And we're not, I kind of feel at the moment we're not doing that.
Commissioner Birch.
That is part of why I was asking through different scenarios of what they had researched, right, to understand perhaps what we could ask for or where we could look at going. If you were going to ask me specifically if I were going to recommend denial, it would be because of the setback issue, very specifically, and the views. But I think those two maybe go a bit hand in hand also. But I'm not sure, I don't think I can recommend how they fix it, because I'm hearing also the conundrum therein of it's a confined spot, we're on a corner, we've got parking spaces to square footage. So I don't know, having asked through some different scenario questions and understanding they had looked at them, and I don't know what else to recommend beyond that, unless you've got a better way to word it.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
One thought I guess I have is if the safe routes didn't exist, and I realize it does a lot of good work, and it's a good thing. But let's just assume for the moment it didn't exist. And they came into and said, this is the project we want. I think we'd say we want a 15-foot setback. And if you do the 15-foot setback, that's moving towards approval, right? But we're very concerned about visual. And then we could talk about how would we like to limit the visual. At the moment, we're not getting past anything. And I think because we're in a conundrum, because we don't know what to do with the safe routes. The safe routes will only be accepted by these people if the project is approved. That's going to cost them $900,000, and it will move the goalposts on the setback. So, we're almost in a impossible situation. If we were to say we would approve the project, but for this problem with setback, which is caused by what they've agreed to do. I mean, it gets very, very confusing. So maybe if we're unable to decide tonight, and it sure sounds like that, maybe what we ought to say is, and I'll defer to council on this, do you have to deny, or do you say we cannot reach a decision for the reasons we've stated? We just can't reach a decision. Some of those decisions are solely within the council's purview. For example, is this a requirement? Isn't this a requirement? Why is it a requirement? I'm in no position to second guess them on that.
I would just maybe add a comment to that, that the elimination of a lane on the boulevard as a result of this project is something that may be an unintended consequence of the Safe Rides to School that maybe hasn't been fully thought through, but I would be very uncomfortable as a member of the Planning Commission with saying that we need to start doing this to implement this throughout the town as well. So, and the reason for the 10 feet is, from what I can see, is to allow a reasonable setback to the building by moving that curb forward. The issue, that I have with that is that it's going to impact people way beyond the neighbors who've been notified about this project. And I don't know whether there's been notification of everyone in town who's going to be affected by the elimination of a lane there. And so, and I haven't heard compelling evidence that says that will improve traffic. I've heard, some statement that it won't make it worse, but I'm not sure that meets with my own personal experience, which is very frequent on that boulevard and on that corner. So I would be very uncomfortable with approving a project, and I don't know that there's a way to do that. But the one thing that does strike me is that one of the constraints on this is that the developer seems to be unwilling to do anything with that building in the back as part of the development. And perhaps there are configurations of a 2-story, 1-story building on that lot that might incorporate that space, because that stands alone and it has space around it. If that were part of a bigger building, perhaps the parking wouldn't be as challenging, because there is some sort of dead space there that isn't being used for parking or anything else. So I'm not convinced that all of the scenarios have been explored and that we have one before us that's an alternative that we could even discuss. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Well, that would argue for sending it back, and I would not be in favor of sending it back. I empathize that if I were sitting out there, I would have no clue what I'm being asked to do. And on the other hand, sitting where I'm sitting, we have serious problems that we cannot solve. So I guess the question I have, there are 4 of us, I guess, if I counting correctly here. So we need 3 votes that either says, send it up and tell the council we cannot make a decision for the reasons stated, turn it down or send it back, which is somewhat suggested by what you're saying. I don't favor sending it back to them because I don't think they've got enough guidance to do anything. So I personally would like to see us get a motion now, because I don't think we're getting anywhere. I personally think what the things we've said have been very good and and helpful. But I think we're now at a point where we ought to either send it on or redo it, and I am not in favor of asking them to redo anything. So is anybody inclined to make a motion? I mean, I will if okay.
No, I would just say that I'm not inclined to send it back because although I think the issue about the views and the boulevard are the big issues, I don't know any suggestions that I could make to the applicant that would then result in something better.
Yeah. So I'm gonna make a motion, but I'm gonna ask my fellow commissioners to weigh in with some of these because I have not been able to capture. There's some very good points. First off, I'm gonna say I'm not gonna ask you to come back because I agree. I don't know what we'd ask you to come back with, and I think that there are circumstances outside of your control that are driving some of the decisions that you're making. So for the sake of moving this on and potentially getting some answers from council, I'm going to recommend denial of Plan Development Application PD-17-002 and Negative Declaration ND-19-002 located at 16212 Los Gatos Boulevard. I'm recommending denial based on concerns for the setbacks, based on concerns for the hillside views, based on concerns that seem to stem around whether there is a requirement for the modifications that are being made based on safe rights to school. And then attached to that, those requirements, serious concerns about how that's going to impact traffic on Los Gatos Boulevard by losing a lane. Have I mostly captured what we've said here? Anybody have anything else? Okay.
Commissioner O'Donnell, sorry.
I suppose we should first find out if there's a second. It just occurred to me.
Oh, sorry.
Is there a second?
Yeah.
I'm not going to second it.
Commissioner Badami.
Second.
Now that there's, my feeling was that I could support a motion to send it up to council without a decision being made, because I personally cannot make a decision. I think the safe routes to school is a very big issue here, and we have no control over that. I don't even really understand it as applied here. On the other hand, I don't see anything intrinsically wrong with the proposal to develop the property. There's nothing wrong with developing their property. They're troubled by the fact that they have to spend all this money and whatever. And a simple thing would be to say, build whatever you're going to build, have a 15-foot setback, work it out. I mean, if you did that, you could do that, but we can't ignore the safe routes to school. So we can't say 15-foot setback, forget the safe routes to school, and come back. That doesn't fly. Therefore, I don't have enough information. I would not want to say to their project, I want to deny your project. I want to say to the project, I don't know how I can either intelligently deny it or approve it till I figure out what we're doing. Is the die cast with the safe rights to school so that we know there it is, you can't do anything about it. Now we can decide, do you want an additional setback? In addition, it's a crazy setback because depending on where you run the setback from, is it the property line or wherever it is, it gets very confusing. So I personally would sure like some guidance from the council as to what they want us to do with the safe routes to school. And as the chair says, this probably won't be the last time we run into this problem. Because I know a lot of work went into this and a lot of good work went into it. But until you apply it in a factual situation like ours, you probably weren't able to deal with that problem.
Maybe just ask a question to staff quickly. Is one of the options that's available the one described by Commissioner O'Donnell, and that is to send it forward with being unable to reach a recommendation?
I think that the effect of saying we're sending it forward with neither a yay or a nay is tantamount to a nay. And I think that the clean option is to simply recommend denial. The council will review the minutes and will understand your concerns and reasons behind it, that it's not necessarily an outright no, it's more, we cannot proceed.
Absolutely.
Would it be possible to simply say, I make a motion, we deny the project, period, without stating and to say, for the reasons stated in the record? The problem I have with the motion before us is it states a very limited concept that I don't totally agree with because of my inability to deal with the safe routes to school. Because no matter what people do after your motion, they can't rectify and satisfy. Whereas if we get the council to say you must observe that, or we see what the problem is, then something might be able to be done. In any event, I could support a motion that says we move to deny this motion, or deny this matter on the basis stated in the record, period, and let them look at it.
I understand what you're saying, and again, the language would be that you recommend denial of the application, and you could say for the matters stated in the hearing. I think what you're articulating is that to attach any explanation almost limits the universe of the reason to that explanation. It might have missed something.
Right.
So, and I don't think you need it. It's not like you're attaching conditions of approval.
How does it make her feel?
But I'll defer to staff on that also, if they have anything else to say.
Commissioner Badani.
I have a question. So would an alternative be, if that doesn't get approved by the maker of the motion to amend it, is just looking at Exhibit 3, we have to make a certain number of findings here and just say we cannot make the findings per Exhibit 3, which is CEQA, consistency with the town's general plan, required compliance with commercial design guidelines, compliance with the Los Gatos Boulevard plan, and I would also add in that you cannot make the finding for a plan development overlay zone, which wasn't included. That's just a thought and a question.
So through the chair, yes, obviously that is an option. Typically, we want to have, and obviously the council will get verbatim minutes of the meeting tonight, whether it's in the motion or whether you just state because you can't make any of the findings without any supporting facts. Those are definitely options. Obviously, it's typically helpful to have some of those facts. I think Commissioner Birch has laid out a number of items that she has concerns. Obviously, Commissioner O'Donnell doesn't feel that's encompassing enough for what his thoughts are. And so there are many iterations of that, but the number 3 that you just mentioned is also an option.
Well, I guess I feel like what I said did include that there is a domino effect based on the safe rides. I just highlighted that a couple of them that have been brought up specifically in this meeting dealt with the setback and the height. So I feel like if I was council, I would get that there may be a catalyst to the other points, and that catalyst being, is this safe ride required or not? If they don't do it, what would the impact of the project be? So I think I'm going to leave it that way, and because I have heard repeatedly from people 2 things as I was writing it down, and those seem to be the major components that got driven by this decision. Maybe, I mean, again, we don't really know how much that impacted the project. We're assuming it's a massive change. We don't know. So that those 2 points are heard by the council as some of the main concerns of what happened with this. So I think I would leave it because I actually feel like I've covered that.
So a question would be, would the motion be including these things? Is that versus on the basis only of these, is the motion including these?
Including the comments that we are unable to make a determination based on how the safe rides.
Sorry, so as I heard the motion, it was recommend denial on the basis of concerns for setbacks, hillside views, that stem on the question of safe, right? So is it on that basis, or is it including?
Yeah, including.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want it to be limited to that basis. I understand
Thank
now.
you.
Yes.
Including but not limited to, as we attorneys like to say.
Yeah, and I want to be careful here that we're not involved in a punt to council situation that actually came up, I think, 2 years ago, where there actually, I thought, were guidelines and standards that could have been followed, but we decided that it would best just to go directly to council. This one is different, and it's different because the safe rides to school and the implication of closing a lane of Los Gatos Boulevard for a single development without thinking through the rest of that concerns me that that is an issue that really needs to be looked at, is the interaction of safe rides to school and the curb situation and the lane size of the Los Gatos Boulevard that I think is beyond the purview of the Planning Commission. So I think I'm differentiating that situation, so I would be in support of a motion that includes but not limited to. And the other reason I would state that is that there were other things that were mentioned as well, such as the applicant treating the rear building as a given and a constraint, where maybe they could have ameliorated some of the other issues with the views and the setbacks if they had reconfigured, the property as well. So there were a number of other things in the record that I think can be brought in if it's an include type of a thing. So we need the seconder, I think, to accept that language.
Yes, I accept the language.
Okay. Okay. Further discussion? Okay. I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So it passes 4-0. Are there appeal rights regarding this item?
Thank you. No, there are not, as this is a recommendation to council.
Okay. Thank you very much. We will be moving on to item number 3, 17528 Torney. Do you want to take a break? Okay. We are into this 2 hours, so let's take a 5-minute break. We'll get started right afterwards. Thanks. Okay, we're now back in session, and we are moving on to item number 3, which is 17528 Torney Road, Architecture and Site Application S18051. Consider an appeal of a Development Review Committee, DRC, decision approving a request for demolition of an existing single-family residence, removal of large protected trees, site improvements requiring a grading permit, and construction of a new single-family residence on property zoned HR 2.5, APN 5370419, property owner Kevin Ibrahimi, applicant Hunt Hale Architects, appellants Beverly and Steve Miller, and project planner is Ryan Safdie. May I have a show of hands from commissioners who visited the property? Okay, any disclosures? Okay, Mr. Safdie, I understand you'll be giving the staff report.
Thank you, Commissioners. Before you is a proposal to demolish an existing and construct a new single-family residence on a non-conforming hillside property zoned HR 2.5. A similar project for the property was approved by the DRC, the Development Review Committee, in 2015, with Planning Commission upholding the Development Review Committee decision on appeal by the neighbors to the south. The application before you is for a new home in substantially the same location and of the same size as the previous approval. As with the previous project, and based on compliance with town code and hillside design guidelines and standards, minus minor cut and fill exceptions for yard areas, the Development Review Committee approved the application. The approval was then appealed by the neighbor to the south, who provided new information to be reviewed by the Planning Commission, referencing discrepancies in the plans and questioning the proposed massing. The applicant has since revised plans to address the discrepancies, resurveyed the site, and provided a summary of correspondence with the appellant, as well as an outline of previous plan changes made to accommodate their concerns. The updated site survey resulted in an increased average slope, which reduced the net lot area and also reduces the maximum floor area from 4,300 square feet to 4,000 square feet. The applicant has agreed to a condition of approval to reduce the proposed house by 300 square feet. Based on the discussion provided in the staff report, staff recommends the commission deny the appeal and uphold the Development Review Committee approval of the application, subject to the conditions of approval. This concludes staff's presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Great. Are there questions? Commissioner Hanson.
I just had one quick question, and it was, and I know it came from the architecture consultant, but it's on page 3 that he had a kind of a profile of the previous proposal versus this one, and I was actually on the commission when we did the previous one, and so my question is, at the bottom he kind of has a drawing of before and after, and if you looked at the before drawing, it sort of looks like they didn't step down the hillside as much as they did in the 2015 project. And I think it's because the house is set back further away from where it drops off. So that's my question to you: is that is there? Am I seeing that right? It's not. Is there an issue with them not stepping the design down the hillside as we ask for in the hillside design guidelines?
The 2015 approval compared to this proposal, the actual grading and site work is very compatible. I believe that's just the way the graphic showed up.
Okay.
In Larry's
so
report.
you don't see any material difference between the previous proposal and now in terms of how they, utilize this hillside and made the building blend in with it?
No, both of them use substantially the same footprint of the existing house, but also propose to drop it down 2 additional feet. So they're both very similar in that aspect.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Birch.
That does lead to a question I had. There's a lot in here that compare it to the previous application, but it's my understanding that lapsed. We are looking at this as a standalone application, just this. We are not comparing it to what was approved before, what maybe conditions or notes have been made before. This is just this application, right?
Correct.
Thank you.
I just had a process question just to set the context for this. So this is an item that was approved by the DRC and then appealed to the Planning Commission, correct? And the DRC made some, I believe, approved some exceptions about LRDA encroachment. Is that correct? And is that within the purview of the DRC to do that?
Yeah, there were minor exceptions for cut and fill, and they were minor exceptions, and the DRC does have the ability to do that.
Okay, and so that's not the basis for the appeal, that the DRC overstepped its authority or anything?
No.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so I will, if no more questions, then I'd like the applicant, Kevin Ibrahimi, I believe. Appellant, I'm sorry, I got this in reverse order. So we'll start with Steve Miller.
In the absence of an overhead,
That's actually the PowerPoint presentation for the next app, for the, yeah.
Question for staff on timing. I have two cards here, Steve Miller and Tony Jeans. Are they both included within the appellant's time of 10 minutes?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, gentlemen.
I'm Steve Miller. My wife Beverly and I live at 1765 1 Turney Road for the last 23 years. We live directly behind the project. So last year, I received an email from a neighbor, which I'm going to read. Hi, Steve. I don't know if you have seen Kevin's house plans yet. They are online at the Los Gatos Town website. I don't think you're going to like it. Big, high, and ugly. Big footprint, 12 to 19 foot ceilings. Building height, 25 feet. House will be closer to you. Lots more square footage. Check out the elevation comparisons from your house to his, way out of proportion. So when I got this, then what I did, I realized that plans had been submitted. So I went down and took a look at them. What I realized is going through them, there's a lot that I didn't understand. So what we did at that time, I contacted Tony, who's a really good friend of ours, and said, Tony, I need your help. This is way beyond my pay grade. Can you help us? So he reluctantly volunteered and came over and took a look. As we went through this, realized there was a lot more to it than I understood. Tony, along the line, said, hey, look, what I'm willing to do is speak on your behalf. So what I wanted to do at this time was just turn over the balance of my floor minutes to Tony.
Thank you. Tony Jeans, friend of Bev and Steve. I'm going to tell you where we are at the moment. At DRC, there was a set of plans approved. When we looked at them, we found a huge number of errors, inconsistencies, and omissions. So we went through that and provided in your packet a series of about 7 sheets that fold out saying what we had found. We also provide them very early on, 2 weeks ago, to Ryan so he could give them to Kevin. Kevin, in the meantime, with that in mind, went to his architect and his civil, corrected a lot of the mistakes and omissions, added a few others that we'll get into, but where we are now is the plans that you are looking at are not the plans that I reviewed at DRC. They're a brand new set of plans, and the submission that I turned in is not quite relevant anymore, so I'm going to address a few points. On the ones that he has addressed,
The applicant on the site section has moved the house, which was in the wrong place. The adjacent neighbor site section, where are the houses really? 50 feet closer to the project site. But Bevan Steve's house still is shown 143 feet away. He needs to move it another 50 feet further. It's actually 93 feet. We measured it with a tape last weekend. The slope, the civil engineer went out and has adjusted the slope based on our comments. We determined that the slope is around 29%. By playing with the contours a little bit, 27% is acceptable. That means a smaller FAR. The size goes down to 4,000 feet with that slope change, but what about the other square footage on this property? We'll talk about that later. The mass wasn't addressed. The elevations were corrected. The hillside guideline issues were not addressed, and the landscape plan, an attempt was made to provide something. So I want you to have a look initially at the first sheet that I gave you in that clip bundle. Let's look at the green stuff first. The green stuff are the trees. We would like an attempt to be made by removing the retaining wall to save the valley oak at tree number 9. It's a nice tree. If you go out there, it also provides a visual buffer. On the left side, there are 3 trees. They're coast live oaks. Up the driveway, these are immediately adjacent to the driveway. They absolutely have to be protected by type 3 tree protection per the arborist report. It wasn't called out in the arborist report, but those trees are on the Miller's section of land, which wraps around this property. So we would like those trees not to be killed. They're coast live oaks and they're very nice. The other thing, now looking at the red, the setbacks are wrong. So the front elevation is on the left, the rear elevation is on the right. The black areas of the building are outside the setbacks. That's part of the carport and part of the bedroom tower and part of the master closet. Please turn to the second sheet. This is a part of the floor plan. The new floor plan, not the one that I originally reviewed, but the one that has now arrived on Friday into the packet. It hasn't been reviewed by the town because it only arrived recently. So let's look at a few things. First of all, on the left-hand side, you can see the 30-foot front setback line and the portion of the carport that is eliminated if you have the correct setback. Secondly, just to the left of that, you'll see I have written 21'6" at DRC. The set of plans that I had to work from had a different dimension there. This has been changed from 21'6" to 20'1" in order to attempt to make the garage size stated as 413 feet in the table directly below the garage, which measured 444 feet in the last submission for the DRC level submission. The problem is that now the garage is illegal. It is not 20 by 20 interior dimension. It's approximately 19 plus by 19 plus. So in trying to shave some square footage out of the garage, it's now an illegal garage, and that needs to be corrected when you go to your final set of plans. Next thing I'll show you is the porte cochere. That area is not counted, it's not tabulated. The California room attic is not counted or tabulated. So you have about 1,345 square feet over and above the stated FAR, plus a deficiency of 300 feet that has to be made up, all of which needs to be dealt with. The additional square footage is not FAR, but it is discretionary to you to determine whether the mass that is included in creating it is excessive. Please turn to the next sheet.
So the blue shaded area in the top chart, the front elevation, is the carport. That is 371 square feet. That is not part of the FAR. The porte cochere is neither part of the FAR, nor is it even mentioned in any table on the plans anywhere. So that's just there. The California room is mentioned. The attic above it is not mentioned, and that just adds to the massing, which really concerns me in a hillside home in this instance. Below that, I was hoping to meet with Kevin, but Kevin didn't want to talk to me. He only wanted to talk to Bevan Steam. I had drawn up a way where this house could be mitigated, where the massing could be reduced by removing the attic at the left side of the lower diagram, by reducing the height of the master bedroom tower from a 17-foot ceiling in the bedroom to maybe 14, and by reducing the master closet to a 10-foot-9 high closet instead of 14 feet high in the master closet. If you look carefully at that, you'll also see that there are windows above in the center, above the master retreat. That's a second story if ever I saw one. It's not included in any section or anywhere in the plan. Please turn to the last page. This was the landscape plan we got. Again, please save the tree, number 9. I think it can be saved very easily. We accept the offer to put privets for screening along the property line. Please plant them at 5 feet on center along the line of the house. And there are a number of other questions, but the attempt to put in 4 box trees, 36-inch box, does not work with the 12 24-inch box trees that are required by the arborist report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions? Commissioner O'Donnell.
So would you tell me a little bit about the process of how you arrived at all these notes? In other words, you took the plans you were reviewing, and then you did what to find what appear to be errors?
Okay, so if you go back to the sheet with a lot of red on it, with the floor plan sheet, I went through the plans as though I were designing a house, and I said, what's this, what's this? Actually, the first thing that stood out at me was you can't do a 413 square foot garage. In Los Gatos, if it is 20 by 20 on the inside, it's got to be about 430 square feet by the time you've got the walls included. So I said, well, there's a red flag. I wonder what the garage really is. So I measured the garage from the floor plans. So I took the set of plans. I have a plotter at my house. I plotted the plans. I measured them. I looked also at the dimensions here and said, okay, they're calculated incorrectly. It should be 444 square feet for the garage as it was shown at the DRC level. I had to do some frantic work changing that in the last 3 days because there are revised plans that I had never seen before. So now it is close to 413 feet, but it's illegal because it's a substandard garage. The rest, I just measured the size of the porte cochere from the dimensions on the plan. I looked at the areas that were missing. I pointed out that the original carport, which was stated as 273 square feet at the DRC set of plans, was 361, and that was corrected by the architect. But because that doesn't count towards floor area ratio, what the heck? So
okay.
I measured things.
Thank you. Commissioner Hanson.
Well, I thank you for your presentation. So I'd like to get back to the matter that's at hand. We're considering an appeal of the DRC's decision to approve this. So the grounds for the grounds for the approval, I heard all kinds of issues with that might have been missed by staff or not. We don't know that yet. but I'm trying to think of what things are harming your friend that would cause you to do the appeal. One thing I heard for sure was the trees and potentially the massing from your last drawing, but I want to ferret out the things that are harming your friend, client, versus
Okay.
things that are technical that I would expect our staff to review anyways.
In a letter that I submitted along with Steve, we changed the grounds of our appeal. We thought at first that the DRC had erred. We now do not believe that is the case. We believe that there was information missing that they did not have an opportunity to review, neither the town architect nor the planning staff, namely all of the missing elements, such as the porte cochere, the attics, the second story in the master bedroom. None of those are shown on the plan. You infer some of them because there are windows. When an architect or a designer does a set of plans, they're meant to identify everything. So we're saying the reason that we are appealing it is insufficient information was provided, inaccurate information. As to the harm is the excessive mass of this building. There is, in addition to the allowable square footage, there is 300 feet over, plus there is 1,600 square feet of discretionary square footage, which is not counted.
Yes, I heard that. So
that mass is there, and a number of people on Turney Road have expressed their concerns over that.
So the main issue is that you're concerned about the massing of the building, and I heard some concerns about trees.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner O'Donnell? Okay. All right. Thank you. You will have an additional 5 minutes after we take other testimony. So I have a number of cards here. William Ewan? Sorry. Can't tell from this. Okay. So let's do, So we have Kevin Ibrahimi, and then Sean Medved, and then Lee Quintana.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Kevin Ibrahimi. I'm the owner and the applicant for 17528 Turney
I wonder
Road.
if you could please move the microphone a little closer.
Sure.
That
This
would
is
be better.
better? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
My mom and dad are also here because they've been working with me through the process in the last year and a half, as they'll also be eventually moving into the home with me. So what is the process and why are we here? Well, let me start with the process. This started about 3 years ago for me when I purchased my home. In May of 2016, I met with Marnie Mosley, who was the planner for the previously approved application. At the time when we met, the application was still valid because it had 2 years. I met Marnie to understand why the previous application was appealed and to review the hillside development requirements. In late 2016, I met with 2 of my immediate neighbors to understand each neighbor's potential concerns. The only one with the concern were the Millers, and their only concern, as I understood it from my meeting with them, was their view and nothing else but the view. That was the most key thing for them. I then met with the architect and came up with the concept plan for my home. Marnie at that time had left the town, so I met with Jocelyn Schutman to make sure the preliminary layout and the design concept met the town requirements and could be supported. I submitted my plans, which reflected the comments from the neighbors, the Millers, the input I received from staff, and the town guidelines. I actually specifically sat down with Jocelyn and reviewed those before I made my submittal. While addressing all of staff's comments, I exchanged close to 30 emails with the Millers and had several in-person meetings with them at their house. Throughout my discussions with the Millers, they told me that their only concern was lowering the ridge to the extent possible. I'm going to show you the next 3 slides that Steve and Tony gave me when I met with them back on December 4th of last year. All the notations on these slides are from Steve and Tony, letting me know that the California room, the master, the carport, garage, and all the other areas were okay with them. They both told me that the only request they had from me was to design the house so to lower the ridge at the single-story portion. They said that's their only concern. They're okay with everything else. I don't know if you could see it. I have the actual sheets, but this is the sheet that I received from Tony and Steve when I met with them. It's hard to see, but it kind of points out over here.
You can take the microphone with you if you wish to move over there.
So this is the sheet that they gave me explaining to me how they were okay with everything here. But what they wanted me to do with the plans was to see if I could lower this ridge because this is what's visible from their home. And then this is the last sheet that I got where they said they're not asking for any change. But again, this is the elevation view of where they wanted the ridge to be lowered. So based on that meeting, I revised my plans, I lowered the ridge, and I made my submittal, bringing the single-story portion of the ridge down to 20 foot, 10 inches. That's inclusive of the 2-foot pad drop that I had done. I submitted a letter earlier, which I believe staff gave you as a desk item, which gave you all the emails that we had exchanged. So if I could go to, this is one of the emails in the handout that you received. The highlighted section is an email from Steve to me because we were going back and forth and I kept asking, what is it that you're having an issue with? And I was trying to get a support letter, and the email that I got from Steve said, we have no objection to the size or style of the house. We have only asked that it not be too tall so not to unnecessarily obstruct our view along such a long roof line. We understand that a section of your house is two-story and will necessarily be taller than the single-story portion. We also understand that you want a couple of tower elements in your design that will also be taller than the adjacent roof line. We're not asking you to modify any of these. So again, this was the direction that I got from the Millers. Again, actually from Steve, not Bev. So this was essentially confirming to me, as the Millers had done up to this stage, that they had no issue with any part of my application other than the ridge line, and they wanted me to further reduce below what I had, which was at the 20 foot, 10 inches. So it's probably far for you to see, but this is the town architect's review comment letter, the bottom being the previously approved application, the top being my home design. And if you could see, this was the area that they wanted me to reduce. And this is essentially what I dropped down, which was still much lower than what was previously approved. And I let the previous application expire. I met with staff and I asked them, what's the process? Is it better to amend it, or is it better to let it expire and for me to submit a new one? They really said that's up to you, but as long as you try to stay consistent, then that's what you would want to do. You wouldn't want to do something that's not consistent. So please note that the proposed architecture is, what I did is spread wider to stay. One of the things that we understood it would be a better design for this lot would be to not go into the sloped areas and to stay on the flat pad portion of the lot, and that's what we did. We made the house wider and we pushed it back than the previous application. The previous application did actually encroach into the slopes, and we tried to push that back as much as we could. So why are we here? when I bought this property, the previous owners cautioned me that they had tried to reach an agreement with the Millers, but ultimately they were appealed to the Planning Commission. I had hoped through reasonable compromise, I would be able to come to some sort of an agreement with the Millers. Again, they were very hospitable. I met down at their house several times. We had wine and we discussed my home design, and we discussed many things. So I really hope that we could get to some kind of a compromise. I worked diligently with the Millers in addressing concerns that they had brought up to me. Ultimately, the main issue is that I wasn't agreeable to reduce the ridge below the 20-foot 10 inches. At the DRC hearing, Steve pointed out that I was removing 5 trees. One of them is diseased and has to come out, but the other 4 are being removed so that I can lower the pad 2 feet. And I'll show you on the exhibit that, so there's 3 trees that were on the roadway that they were wanting to make sure they're protected. We're not touching those. I'm not sure where they come from, but they're completely outside of the construction area. So lastly, this is the landscape plan. I met with staff and they wanted to know what is it that we could do to show what the intent is going to be for the landscaping. The town arborist came back and said there is a requirement to have 4 36-inch box and the remaining 24-inch box. So we placed them so that they would provide the most visual protection. I want that for my house, and I also want it to be there to protect the view from the roadway adjacent to my home. So I'm happy to be here tonight to address any questions or concerns that you have. I've actually thought a lot about what are the things that, if you have issues with, how would I be able to address them? So if you have issues, I really hope that you can discuss them with me. And as I said in my letter earlier, I really hope that we can come to a conclusion and finalize the application tonight. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions? Yes, Commissioner Badami.
Is your architect here tonight?
So my architect is flying out of country tonight. The reason we elected to still have the hearing tonight is because my neighbors are also leaving the country, I believe in a few days. So the question was, do we have it when they aren't here, or do we have it when my architect isn't here? So it was important for them to be here, and we had the hearing tonight.
So your architect is probably not aware of this exhibit that we got tonight from Mr. Jeans?
No, but I can address almost everything that you have there. So if you ask me to quite, because there's...
So why don't we see if there's some questions about that? Commissioner Badami, do you have questions about that?
I'll rest for now.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner O'Donnell.
When did you receive the document that we just got tonight?
About 5 minutes ago.
Okay, so you've just glanced at it.
Well, I've been involved with this for a couple of years, so I understand what he's saying, and I can address if you have any questions. But yes, I just saw it.
Well, I guess at some point you've assumed you submitted correct plans, did you not?
I believe the plan, so twice I had met with the Millers, and twice Tony had given comments to staff throughout the process that he had reviewed the plans and he had seen discrepancies and he wanted those to get updated. I met with Ryan Safdie and we updated the plans based on the comments that Tony had given. So every time Tony gave comments, we updated them.
My question really is, tonight's plan, which we just saw and I think you just saw, I'm just wondering if you, in the brief time you looked at it, are there new comments on this or the ones you've already addressed?
There's some new and some that we've already discussed with staff.
Okay, and I guess what I'm concerned with is that there are some new comments on this. If they're not addressed, then are we to assume they're correct?
No, they're not correct.
Okay, so you want to tell us, I guess, which are wrong?
Yeah, please, if I could. So should I point to this? Because I know you have a copy.
We have it before us, so if you do that, that would help.
Sure. So first, there are 3 trees that are along our private shared roadway that go up. These trees were never discussed to be touched or to be impacted in any way. the construction of the home is in this area, and they're completely outside of the, I mean, they're just part of the roadway to get to where we're building the house. So again, these 3 trees that they're asking to be saved, they were never part of a discussion on our side to touch them, and they were never part of a discussion from them to save. We're not touching them, we're not getting anything close to these trees.
Aren't
So
those 3 trees outside your property line?
they are part of the shared roadway that gets to my home.
Okay.
But again, there is no construction that's proposed in that area, and so I agree with them, we're not touching those. And they were never part of any of the reports that they would be touched. Then one of the key elements in here, it talks about setbacks. I specifically had 2 meetings with staff to talk about how do they want to apply setbacks for this property. They had come up with the setback requirements of the previous application. I sat down and reviewed those with them, and they said that's how they want me to apply that for this application. So as they have put they showed this as a side for 20 feet here, they showed this as a rear, and they showed this as a front. That's not how staff had the previous application done, and that's not the direction that I received. The setbacks that we have is it has this back here as the rear, side, front, and that's how the application was submitted, because in working with staff, that is the direction that we received to do. This is the first time that I've received something that says the orientation of where the front and back is, it's different. I hadn't seen this before, but I can tell you staff will verify, we sat down and reviewed how they wanted setbacks to be done. Okay, so the only other thing I see on this exhibit is 2 trees that they're saying could potentially get saved. I have, and you can check with staff, from the time that I submitted my application till now, I have every intention trying to see how many of those 5, of the 5, one of them is diseased that the arborist said has to go, so that will have to go. Of the other 4, I'm gonna have every intention to see if I can save them. The pad is being dropped by 2 feet, which impacts some of these trees. They're absolutely correct, this Valley Oak number 9 is a great, beautiful tree. I have every intention of trying to save it. The application has it, that it's part of the removal, and along with the other 3, which makes a total of 4, because I don't know how the 2-foot drop is going to impact it. But again, I've stated this to Mr. Safdie from the time that we submitted the application. My intent is to save those because I think they provide me as much screening as I need. So that's everything on this sheet. So on the second sheet, where they're talking about the front setback line, again, that's not how it was defined by staff on how we did our setbacks. So as far as the calculations, so I don't know how he's calculating a 2nd-story above attic in the California room. There is a California room, so there is square footage for that. He's calling this a portico share. This is the entry walkway to get to the house. If it's called a portico shape, that's fine. All of those areas, as I met with staff before we started the design, if you had 2 or more openings and they could review it and support it, they said that's not part of the FAR. That's not how the FAR gets calculated. So I think in respect, they were asking why isn't that square footage on it, because I specifically got from staff what we need to show on square footage and what needs to be dimensioned, and I did it exactly as we had worked with staff. As far as the garage being illegal, I think what Tony's referring to may be correct. I don't know, maybe he's saying it needs to be an additional 3 inches or so to make it to the 20 foot. During the working drawings, whatever the requirement is, they will be. So if they need to be increased by additional 3 inches, we'll increase them by the additional 3 inches and we'll adjust the square footage. If I could go to the the next sheet. I think the next sheet is carried through from the other sheet, what he's calling out to be added square footage. I don't know what to tell him that, except that's not part of the FAR. And then the bottom section is something I haven't seen before, but they've talked to me about within the last 10 days or so, because before that, it was never a conversation about any of the other features dropping them, like the California room or the master. It's just what they're asking to do. And if I could go to the last sheet, for instance, they're asking if the privets that I've proposed, if they could be 5 foot on center. My intent is to install them at 3 foot on center, if they're 15 gallon. And it's basically about saving the 3 trees that we're not getting anywhere close to these and seeing if the other trees are worth saving, which I absolutely agree. If we can save those, we would want to save those.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I had a question, if I may, on the hillside design standards. State that the use of architectural features that increase visual prominence should be avoided. Massive tall elements such as 2-story entries, turrets, and large chimneys should be avoided. Could you describe the purpose of the attic above the carport?
Above the carport?
Above the porte cochere. And on the second sheet from Mr. Jeans, it's the part that says remove attic.
Oh, I think that's over the master bedroom.
Oh, okay.
So so there's really one attic that I have throughout this whole house. There is no attic anywhere except over the master bedroom. It starts from 0 feet to 6.5 feet height. I think the questions the Millers had is, why do I have a window there? Because I will have 3 mechanical.
Actually, just make sure we're talking about the same
Sure.
thing. I'm talking about this.
I'm sorry, I need my glasses. Okay, that's the California room.
Right, and I'm talking about the attic above the California room. What's the purpose of that, and is that an architectural feature that increases visual prominence?
Yeah, so there is no attic above it. The purpose of that was to provide some kind of an interest as you drive up to the front of the house. So that's all that, but there is no attic above it. That's why I was trying to understand the purpose of having double counting that square footage. What I will say is if the commissioners so choose, I can show you exhibits that I can reduce the California room height. In addition, I can also reduce the master bedroom height. I looked at it and I talked to my architect. Again, his thoughts and my thoughts was they added interest to the architecture, but in the interest of moving on, I'd be more than happy to work with you to do that and show you that.
Do you have drawings that indicate that now?
Yes.
Oh, would you be willing to share them with us?
Sure. Oh, Ryan, can I? Can you? Oh, Ryan, it's not coming up. So if the commissioners so choose, what I could do is I could drop, and again, I hadn't seen it before, but I think that's what Tony was proposing. I can drop the master bedroom down. This is the height here, drop it down. And the same with the California room, drop it down, which is here now, dropping it down to here, which is very close to what I think Tony had, which brings this at a 12-foot and this same line as the rest of the
Okay.
great room.
Quick follow-up to that. Is that something that would be visible from the Miller's property?
No, because, so where you're looking, well, I say no to the master bedroom because as you're looking from the Miller's property, this ridge is higher than the master bedroom, so you can't see the master bedroom. And as you're looking from the Miller's property, you're looking down from this direction through here.
But you would be able to see the California room, the shortened height of the roof there from the Miller's property, is that correct?
Probably.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Okay. Thank you.
Again, if I could add, I really want to work with you to be able to move forward if we can. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one more card, which is Lee Quintana. If anyone else would like to speak, I'd be happy to take cards. Oh, I see. I thought you were part of the applicants team. The applicants team. Could you clarify whether he's part of it? Okay, Lee Quintana, please go ahead. We'll straighten this out. So.
Okay, Lee Quintana. Unfortunately, I haven't had the privilege of looking at all of the plans that you have been able to look at since the overhead wasn't working. But my comments primarily deal with, I don't know whose this is, deal with the fact that the DRC approval is based on meeting technical requirements, which are the objective requirements of the zoning code and the hillside development standards and guidelines, and not necessarily the standards and guidelines of the hillside development standards and guidelines themselves, especially because many of the standards and the guidelines are not objective. They're shalls, but they're not objective shalls that give you numbers to work with. So there's a lot of discretion that goes into determining whether you agree that they're met or they're not met. I think, again, with the hillside standards and guidelines, both in the forward, in the introduction, and in the section of development intensity, it clearly states that the FAR is not guaranteed, that it's not a goal, and that the project needs to meet the standards and objectives of the guidelines, standards and the applicable guidelines. I think that one of the most important things in the guidelines has to do with the allowed gross floor area, and it's probably best summarized in the section that deals with maximum allowed gross floor area, which is achieving the maximum floor area allowed is not guaranteed due to individual site constraints. The priority is to comply with the standards and guidelines rather than design to the FAR. The FAR is a numerical guide, and achieving the allowable floor area is not a goal. Greater weight shall be given to issues including but not limited to height, building mass, scale, visual impacts, and grading compatibility. I want to get down to the architectural design section, which has a section on minimizing bulk and mass, and I think this is key to this proposal. It says buildings shall be designed to minimize mass and scale and volume, and the building shall be designed to conform to the natural topography and contours. The guidelines indicate, and by the way, I need to back up, can't back up, I don't have time, to explain the difference between standards and guidelines. The guidelines are, the most important part is keep the form simple, avoid designs that are massive and bulky, minimize square footage, minimize volume, use vaulted ceilings rather than high walls with attics above to achieve the feeling of volume. And I'm out of time.
Okay. Thank you. Maybe there's some questions. Yes, Commissioner Badami.
So, Ms. Quintana, is it your thought process that this does not meet the intent of the hillside design standards and guidelines or the vision?
That's correct, especially since in the introduction it explains that the standards are mandatory. The guidelines are not mandatory, but they are ideas or suggestions on how to meet the mandatory requirements. Therefore, the high stem walls and heights of the porte-cochere, the California room, etc., haven't been taken into consideration. They could be lowered. They're not counted as square footage. Questionably, I think you could argue maybe they could be, but they certainly add to the mass and bulk of the building and the design, and that's the major, I think, thrust of the standards and guidelines is to minimize mass and bulk.
Thank you, Ms. Quintana.
Okay, thank you. I do have one more card, and that's Sean Medved. Sorry, what's the name? Okay. Sean Medved and then William Ewan.
Hi, my name's Sean Medved, and I'm one of the previous owners of the property at Attorney Road here that we're discussing tonight. And so this is a big deja vu for me. When I bought the property, I went and met with the Millers, had the almost identical experience that he had, and I thought it would be important to share that so that when you guys make your decision, you understand that it was a compliant project. We worked diligently with the neighbors to make expensive changes to protect their view. It took years to kind of get to that point, and they kept moving the goal line in what I think was unfair practice, because similar to what Kevin explained, they were fine. We were done. It was great. Everything was fine, and then new things came up. And we ended up here, just like this, and because we were appealed at the 11th hour, even though they had verbally sort of said that everything was fine. So I just came to share that. I'm here if anybody has questions, but I think with that, I don't want to go into the comparisons of the two properties. I don't even know enough about that at this point, but I thought it was pertinent, and Kevin asked me to come, so that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you. Commissioner Birch has a question.
Was it the difficulty in getting this process through for you part of why you wound up selling the property?
It was maybe a little bit. It was a few different things.
Okay.
But it wasn't totally that.
Okay, thank you. And William Ewan, I apologize for missing your card. It looked like you were part of a team, but we misunderstood. So thank you.
No problem. Not many people pronounce my last name correctly. Thank you. So my name is William Yuan. I'm one of the resident or homeowner of Turney Road, just one house above Miller's. And I in general, have no problem with neighborhood development or renovations. So just based on my comments, based on my impression by looking at the story poles, which is appears very tall and very close to the road. And we're passing this right on the entrance of Attorney Road, so we're passing by every time. So that's just my comments to make. But also, I just noticed there are a lot of changes being made, or aware of, and also they're actively working on something, and hopefully they can reach a happy medium, so everybody would be happy with it. So that's all.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions? Okay, thank you, sir. So now we will allow the applicant 5 minutes and then the appellant 5 minutes after that. So, Mr. Ibrahimi.
I just like to say what I said earlier. If there are things that you find concerns with, please let me know. I've really spent hours just thinking about what could I do if there are concerns that you have. One of my brothers asked, then why aren't you doing some things? Why are you asking them for their concerns? And I just want to be upfront with you. The reason is I've looked at this with staff, I've looked at this with my architect, and I couldn't find issues. The only thing that I truly heard Steve and Bev on, and I thought, okay, I can get other people's perspective as I need to be prepared for the California room and the master to see if I can drop those down, because that could potentially be an issue for someone else. So that's what I put together and have it ready. But I'm asking you, if there are things that you find objectionable, please share it with me, and I like to be able to be able to move on and build our home. Thank you. If you have questions for me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the appellant has 5 minutes.
Okay, if you look at the sheet with all of the elevation sheet, that sheet there, you will see that on this plan, which is actually the architect's plan that I copied, it says front elevation. So the left side of the building is the front, and the rear elevation is the Turney Road side. That was what I went by, the architect's plans, when I looked at the front and rear setbacks. So if they want to change it and make the front somewhere else, that's fine. They just need to make the plans correct. I've also talked briefly to Kevin Abrahami, and he's possibly prepared to make a few little changes which would make it more acceptable to the millers by reducing some of the mass. Some he's already pointed out on the plan. They're very similar to some of the changes that I showed on that sheet at the bottom of the elevation sheet there. But if you approve this tonight, I don't know what you're getting. So one set of plans was provided for DRC. A second set of plans was provided a few days ago, and we found some problems with, because not everything had been adjusted in a way that works, legal garages, etc. So if you approve it tonight, you'll be approving plan set number 3 that we don't know what it is, for a smaller house per condition number 3 that's been added to the conditions of approval. So our request is that you give specific direction to the applicant and his team to come back, to revise the plan and come back either to you or to DRC. I'm comfortable with you doing that and presenting a revised set of plans. I think Kevin and I can sit down and just agree on a couple of things. He can give it to his architect. I think you can come up with a solution that works for the body of the building. The question then is, what do you want to do with 1,600 square feet of discretionary space? Do you want to allow that? If that is the case, then okay, allow it. But be aware what you're allowing with porte cocheres, and some gets taken out if you remove the attic from the California room. I'm okay with that. But I think it needs some mass reduction in that location to work. I think Kevin and I can talk about it, and the millers seemed okay. Otherwise, I think you have to give them direction to correct or verify the slope and change the underlying civil plans, reduce the house size of the FAR to take out the 300 feet and the garage space and whatever else you need, correct the data table to show the square foot of all the structures, reduce the mass to improve compatibility with the hillside guidelines, move the house perhaps a little bit further away from Turney Road, perhaps remove the second-story windows at the master retreat and the bedroom tower, perhaps reduce the discretionary space somewhat, save number 9 Valley Oak, tree number 9, call out tree protection on the trees up the driveway, which is the main driveway that all the construction traffic and grading equipment will be going up and down to get to that project. And they are right at the driveway. So they will be hit by equipment going in and out during construction, and provide a species on the landscape plan. If you did that, we wouldn't want to be an appellant. We would just say, okay, present that back to you guys at the hearing in a reasonable fashion, and we'll accept it if it's, what is reasonable. So I think there is a compromise there, but we don't think that you should approve it as is today. I think it needs to come back one more time.
Okay. Are there questions?
I will give you this. I was going to put this up on the display. This was the request and the direction that we might think is warranted, but that's up to you. It was meant to be on a display, but I can't display it. I'm sorry, I only have one copy.
Is that information that was contained previously in your appeal?
In letters, yes. I said, here are things that I think you could do. I'm just trying to summarize them. I'm just concerned that approving, remember, when we appealed, we did not know another set of plans was going to come and supersede everything that we'd commented on. So our comments weren't valid, and we had to wing it.
I understand that. Question about the plans that are in front of us tonight. You said that the plans are not accurate. Are you referring to the project data A1, C1.1, C1.3, those drawings that are in our packet? Are you saying that
I looked, the elevations had been corrected. The data table is missing. The garage is wrong. It's got to be increased in size, so you've got to take some more out of the square footage out of the house.
So the plans are not accurate, or you believe that the size is too small for the requirements of the town? I'm saying, you've said that the plans are wrong, that there's mistakes. Are the plans in front of us?
I regard making a garage that's the wrong size and doesn't meet the town standards a mistake. Little things, there are not.
So let me ask you, are there significant errors in the drawings that are in front of us?
No, there are no longer significant errors other than the setbacks, which need to be adjusted, which can be done by changing everything around and regarding a different front. But the plans as they are drawn are inconsistent. Civil drawings do not equate to the architectural drawings in terms of setbacks, which is kind of weird. And several other things need to be corrected, and then you need to reduce some mass.
Okay.
But I think most of the errors have been resolved.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions, Mr. Jeans? Okay. Thank you very much. We will now close the public portion of the hearing and move to questions of staff from any of the commissioners or comments. Commissioner Birch.
Mr. Safdie, I assume any recommendations and any corrections that get made to these drawings will be submitted to you for your review?
Me and the community development director, yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Some of the things we've heard, I think, would be easily referred to by us as, to the extent we want any changes. There are a number of things we've met that the people have agreed to change, I think, this evening. So, and you must have heard the same thing I did. And the question that they're being asked right now is there something we can approve tonight, or should we have you come back with other plans? Very frankly, I'd like to approve something tonight. But that depends upon your level of comfort having heard all this. I mean, I think personally I followed, I think most of it, if not all of it. But some of the points are directly related to an architect's preparation of plans, which I would not substitute my judgment on. But the substance of this, I think we all heard. So I guess my question to you is, if we were to enumerate those things that we have heard this evening that we understand and would like changed, and otherwise approved it, are you comfortable with being able to make necessary changes so the plans can be followed?
Yeah, again, I think if the commission wants to make specific directions to the satisfaction of the community development director, that would be one option. They would have, if they're clear directions, lowering the height of a particular ridge or something to that effect. The more specific you could be,
The reason I asked it that way, there are some comments that seem to relate to, very frankly, if there's an error of what I consider a minor error, I'm not sure that it's significant enough to make the change. And certainly I would not sit here and try to list those. There are some changes which I think are significant and could reduce the bulk of mass and that kind of thing. So I guess all I'm saying is at the end of the day, I'm not going to, perhaps my fellow people can do that, but I don't know that we have to hit every single thing that was mentioned, whether we consider it substantial or not substantial. So I guess I'm really asking you your level of comfort in just receiving direction from us after having heard all this and seeing that it is satisfactory. And I guess somebody's going to comment on that.
Through the chair, Joel Paulson, Community Development Director, I'm more than confident in taking in any direction that the Planning Commission has, and then we will interpret that. I'm sure the applicant and the appellant's representative have had conversations throughout this process, and we will do our best to make sure that we get any of those things resolved. There may be even some opportunities for some of the things that may not be important to the Planning Commission that they resolve on their own.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Hansen.
So I have a question for staff, and this is just a question of process. So when we hear an appeal from the DRC, they file an appeal form and they state their reasons for appeal, correct? Okay, and I think you summarized them in the staff report. So I know this was presented this evening, but I'm concerned about the idea of moving target, about what's it going to take to satisfy the appellant. And so based on just having viewed this tonight, is there new information in here that wasn't in the appeal?
Nothing substantial, no. And at the end of the day, it's the Planning Commission's decision.
I understand that. So you're saying that even if they present new information that wasn't in the appeal, that we can consider that?
Through the chair again, yes. The decision, the appeal from DRC to the Planning Commission doesn't have the same findings that the appeal from a Planning Commission to a council decision, where there's those 3 specific findings. Those don't exist for a DRC appeal.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions? Commissioner O'Donnell. Absolutely.
Now, this is going to motion, invite everybody. So I would move that we grant the appeal. Well, we're going to, okay, it's a question of semantics here. At the end of the day, we're going to say you can move forward. The appeal will produce changes. So how I phrase that, I can say, okay, I think you're right. We would deny the appeal, subject, however, to making the following changes to the plans as submitted. So that would work. Now, this is where I'm going to try to list the changes, which I'll invite everybody else to join in. But if you look at the page we've all been looking at, which unfortunately these are not numbered, but this is the paper, the page, I think it's 3 or 4 pages in.
You're referring to the elevation page?
Is that what? Yes, rear elevation and front elevation. In any event, the bottom part of that, the rear elevation, shows some red marks suggesting as to lowering, and I believe the applicant had agreed to almost all of those. You say you didn't, but lowering some of them, okay, let's get to the ones he did agree to. My understanding was he had agreed to lowering at least some of the things as shown on the rear elevation.
I don't know if it would be helpful, but there is a drawing that he presented that showed the lowering of some of those, and I don't believe it's in the record.
Okay.
that might suffice to describe the changes that the applicant has agreed to.
All right, we're looking at something that we should put in the record then, I assume.
I would hope so. I mean,
Okay, so the motion would incorporate by reference that drawing. That is what's being offered, as I understand it, by the applicant, as changes the applicant would be willing to make. My only question is, to what extent do they differ from the rear elevation red marks as shown? So I guess we'd have to take a look at that. The lower part of the rear elevation shows the removal of the attic. When I look at A5, which is what was just submitted, okay, I guess we could say that that would supersede the drawing that would be referenced as rear elevation west. There's a lot, when I'm trying to compare these two things together, it's rather difficult to do. Yeah.
if I might just weigh in, that I would be comfortable with the drawing submitted by the applicant. For a variety of reasons, it's not even clear what these were based on. So, whereas that I know was based on the current drawings that have been submitted. And so I would be more comfortable relying on that drawing provided by the applicant, just my opinion.
All right, so if the motion, which I'm still trying to frame, would incorporate by reference the document which has just been submitted to us, labeled as the residence and exterior elevations A5, oddly enough also referenced as page 7. Those changes would be included in the motion. There were also some references to some trees. And so if we look at the specific references to the trees, and that is on the very first page of the packet that Mr. Jeans gave us this evening, the three live oaks, which appear to be very close to the property line one way or the other, I think all that's being asked for is adequate steps be taken to preserve and to protect those trees during construction. So the motion would include that. And as far as Valley Oak number 9, the applicant has said he will try to save it, but there will be a change of 2 feet in the elevation. So subject to the potential effect of that change of elevation, the motion would say that he will attempt to save that tree subject to that change of the 2 feet in elevation. In other words, you can't guarantee it. What else? Well, that's all I have at the moment, so I would ask anybody else who has something else to.
Okay, I would second the motion, and maybe just add a comment that I think the reductions that are provided on that document that we received.
The one that Mr. Jeans submitted?
No.
Or the other document?
The other document that we've submitted as part of the motion. I think we can make a finding for that based on the Hillside Design standards, specifically that the use of architectural features that increase visual prominence should be avoided. Massive tall elements such as 2-story entries, turrets, and large chimneys should be avoided. And I think that that modification is consistent with that language in the Hillside Design Guidelines. Commissioner Badami.
May I see the exhibit so I know what I would be approving or not approving? Okay.
It's projected, but it's hard to see, so we can just take a moment for the commissioners to have a look at the paper version that we have, the one copy that we have.
And then while you're looking at that, again, through the chair, we are under the assumption that this motion and second would incorporate the findings included in Exhibit 2, as well as the considerations in Exhibit 2.
Yes.
And absolutely.
So I just wanted to make a comment. I do think that the applicant's taking some great steps to comply with the hillside design guidelines by agreeing to lower the height of those two big elements in the house. And I think that brings it a lot more in compliance. And then as far as the FAR, I mean, the residence is close to the limit of the FAR, and also including the square footage. But it was noted in the staff report that this lot is much smaller than many of the other lots on the street. So in terms of actual square footage, it's not nearly as big of a house as some of the other houses in the neighborhood. And it only affects the FAR, and it actually is going to be one of the smaller houses in the neighborhood. So the combination of the applicant's willingness to reduce some of the bulk and massing combined with the fact that it does in fact generally fit in terms of size, and it isn't prominently bigger than the houses in the neighborhood, I think makes it something I can support.
Commissioner Birch.
I guess I'll make a last comment. I want to commend the applicant on appearing to bend over backwards to work with your neighbors, including coming to this meeting tonight without your architect so that they could be here. I think that it's shown a lot of good faith on your efforts, and I think that the two modifications made tonight, it's still a beautiful home, and then hopefully it resolves all these issues.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Some of the things that have already taken place, I want to just verify. For example, the reduction in the total square footage as proposed, I think went down around 300 feet. And that's going to be done, right? All those things will be done. Right. So we don't have to do that. So I think we have the motion now, and we've got some suggestions, I think, to add on to that. And if we do, I would adopt that, if the seconder would too.
Yes, I would. Okay. Let me make one more comment about process. This has been very challenging tonight to be presented with documents with no advance notice to review. And if it weren't for the fact that we were having projector problems, I would be requesting a continuance so that we had adequate time. I think that we are obliged to review all documents that come before us, including those that are presented in the meeting. However, we have to put the weight on them that is commensurate with our ability to understand them. And to be presented with a document during a meeting that has some very specific changes that we can't relate back to other drawings would, in my mind, be completely unacceptable, but for the fact that we didn't have a projector tonight. So that's just my comment on the process. I will call the question at this point. So all in favor? Aye. Opposed? So it passes unanimously 5-0. Are there appeal rights?
Yes, there are. The decision of the Planning Commission is appealable to the Town Council within 10 days of the decision on forms available in the Town Clerk's office. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we will now move on to item number 4, which is the report from Director of Community Development. Mr. Paulson, do you have a report tonight?
Thank you. Quickly, the council met last week and introduced the demolition ordinance modifications that were considered by the Planning Commission. They also had a couple other items that were offered by some architects that they have sent back to the Policy Committee, so we could have another round of modifications depending on what comes out of Policy Committee on demo. And then I also wanted to announce that next Thursday we'll have a General Plan Advisory Committee meeting here in the chambers at 7. We are going to begin the high-level discussion of potential land use alternative goals and policies moving forward in the preparation of the general plan update.
Okay, thank you. One question: so the meeting for later this month, is that? Do we have an agenda for that meeting?
We don't. I actually believe that next meeting will be canceled.
Okay.
Yeah, we will discuss that with admin staff tomorrow just to confirm that, and then shoot out an email just so everyone has that on their calendars or off their calendars, should it be.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other reports from the subcommittees that commissioners serve on? Commissioner Badami.
The CDAC met earlier this afternoon, and I don't have the address handy. I don't know if the other two commissioners do, but it was for a project on Los Gatos Boulevard, which was opposite the North 40 on Nodden Lane. And it was for a zone change from residential to commercial with mixed use on the bottom and apartments on top that met rather favorably within the Conceptual Development Advisory Committee. And if somebody wants to weigh in with an address that I don't have handy, I'd welcome that.
I believe it's 14926 Los Gatos Boulevard.
Thank you.
Okay. Other committees, I believe we have GPAC is coming up but hasn't met.
We haven't met since before our last meeting when we talked about it.
Okay. And I think there was a historic preservation that I may have missed that we may need to enter the addresses into the record for that. And we'll catch up on that next time. I just wanted to maybe make one other comment before closing on this. There was a fair amount of discussion, mostly on my part, about concerns I had about the traffic impact analysis, specifically with regard to its failure to capture the gridlock situation that occurs. And at some point, the academic exercise and the reality get very far separated. And I would just ask that those comments that I made be thought about by staff, and that potentially, with the potential outcome that council takes a look at how we examine traffic when we know that these reports are just not correct, and when we know that baselines may be well underestimated because of these regularly occurring events of gridlock, and the possibility that our baseline numbers are being severely underestimated, not because of the methodology that's used, but because of the sampling and the way the sample is collected. And the single date with the failure to incorporate the possibility of picking up these events, I think, is leading us to some issues that we're just ignoring. And I think at some point, ignoring this becomes a safety issue for the town. And so I would just ask that staff consider, and potentially council consider, other alternative ways to capture the fact that we do have gridlock in town and that it's affecting, and every development that we add to that situation potentially makes it worse, and we should really think about that. So, and thank you for fellow commissioners for indulging me on that topic. Okay, so this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.